Murder Church on the fucking air. Murder Church. Gotta clear the pipes. Whew. All right, who's ready to rock and roll? You guys ready? You guys ready? Let's fucking go! Early on a Sunday morning, but it's not as early as usual. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Murder Church. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Week 19, believe it or not. Yes, I stayed up even extra long, even longer than normal last night. So I knew it was going to be a must to knock this out at least one more hour. Thank you for being here. Appreciate the hell out of it. Please share this out to your communities. Let people know that you're hanging out on Murder Church. We appreciate the hell out of it. Week 19. That's unbelievable to me. Everybody hang out in the chat. I appreciate it. I see a lot of fine folks in here already. Welcome, 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 guys. Hell yeah. Let's go through here. See who's hanging out. Looks like Donna thought that we might be coming on at 9. I hope you're still hanging out, Donna. Thank you for being here. Wildside, Todd, what's up? Dixie, Kelly, Tango Crochet, Hope 8 Fear, Dizzy, Kelly Gale, Megsy. Oh, MVP on these shows. If you're unaware, Megsy knows her Dahmer shit. Donnie, good morning. What's going on, brother? Kathy, Joanne. Yeah, we got a full house. Jay, what's going on, brother? Hope you had a great weekend. Anybody that Bobby Hanson, thank you for being here. Anybody Brooklyn, I see you down there. Anybody that did not see Feral Friday, please go check out Feral Friday, because what happened on Feral Friday is the embodiment of Publicly Buzzed Live, guys. Okay, that was fun as shit, and there will be more of that coming. We will continue to have guests. We always get badass guests. I will continue to hunt guests, especially when I get interested in whatever subject matter I'm looking at in per se that week. But I want to make sure those stay, because that was fun as shit, and that is the embodiment of true Publicly Buzzed right there. That was awesome. Hopefully you guys will go check that out, and it got rave fucking reviews. So who else is hanging out in here tonight? Who else is hanging out? Probably gonna butcher this one. I think I do every time. Shalama, probably killing it. Thank you. Also, one thing I gotta do is get the actual pop out the chat here. I was trying to pop that one up. Get that so I can get that on the screen for you guys to see. I see people doing some gifts already. You guys are amazing. Oh my God. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Jay, hold on. Oh my God. Anybody that does not know, that may actually turn you against us completely. Dan, I fired him for a moment on Friday. Dan doesn't like Keanu. I did lose a brother momentarily. Everybody right now, holy shit. The chat's going nuts. Let me crawl back up here just for a second. And I'm sorry if I missed anybody, guys. That's what I was trying to pull up right there. Boom. Shalaba, right? Charlotte, good morning from the future. Melissa, everybody coming through. Disney Nerd, what's up? And we got a gifted membership coming through from Joanne. Hopefully these are working. Welcome to the party, pal. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Who got that? Post Punk Mama, hell yeah. Welcome. Welcome to the party, pal. Beers in chat, I'm sure already is happening out there. Or whatever your advice may be. There's a lot of them to choose from. Kelly Gale, a member for 2 months. We got an anniversary right here live on Murder Church. Holy shit.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Anniversary! It's anniversary!
That's awesome. 2 months, Kelly. Has it really been that long? I keep seeing Kelly come through here, always chatting, always leaving comments. Amazing is what she is. What else do we got here? Tangled Crochet, member for 3 months. Love every minute of it. Loving every minute of it.
Happy anniversary.
3 fucking months also.
Happy anniversary.
Loving every minute of it. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Sarah coming through here. What's up? You got a little singing in me today. See, this extra hour done brought some energy with it, baby. Steve, I was catching the replay. Love it. You have never seen Dan talk so much. Dan was on fire for Murder Church, you see. And sometimes guests can stifle Dan. I don't want to stifle Dan too much. If you want to get my drift, okay, Dan has brought a lot of fine folks through this channel. I haven't finished watching the rewatch of Feral Friday, but I was watching before I came here. That's awesome. That's freaking awesome, man. Hell yeah. Everybody. Dizzy, good morning. I'm not sure if I said Dizzy. I think I may have. Dude, Keanu Reeves. It broke me live. And if you watch that clip that I posted, it's hilarious because I literally go from just like, I even reacted, like almost react, right? I had the laugh. I was like, and then I was like, wait, what did you just fucking say? I dropped my drink with intensity and I get rid of that motherfucker right then and there. And then it was intense. The Matrix, he's like, the Matrix was good. Speed, Bill and Ted, hell yeah, John fucking Wick. And I might watch part 4 today just in honor of my man Keanu Reeves. Are you kidding me? P Fox coming through here. Good morning, P Fox, Bonnie Bailey, Shannon. We're still rolling them through. Kitty City. This is what I like to see. As you come through, hit that like. Let YouTube know that you're hanging out with Publicly Buzzed Live and that you're loving it. Loving every minute of it. This is wild today, boys. This is And I do love Dan. Dan's a fantastic man. Dan's quote on Feral Friday. This whole show has been a bad time to come in. Yes, somebody rolled in when we were talking about some crazy shit. I told a story about almost getting shot in the head by Dan as a child. You learned about our Uncle Larry, who had a very interesting life. It was crazy. Dan was revved the fuck up. Holy shit, we're revved up this morning. It looks like Lisa, good morning to you, coming through here. Hope Ain't Fear, happy anniversary, throwing it out here. I think I already mentioned you. Hope Ain't Fear, always coming through here with the love. Tangled Crochet, gifting out 5 memberships. Melissa, Sandra, Linzabelle, Joanne, what is that one? Tiara. Liz coming through with one as well. I'm gonna act like I didn't ruin that one. I totally did. Welcome. Oh shit, hit him with a Holly. Let's wake Holly Berry up. Oh my god, thank you all so much for coming through here. What is going on? Feral Friday had me rolling. It might be the funniest one we ever had. It was amazing. Welcome to members. Jay knows what's up. Wow, what is going on? Jay coming through with insane freaking guests every freaking week. Are you kidding me? Dude, he just booked Joni Johnston. Are you freaking kidding me, man? Like Jay gets the guest, y'all. So make sure you're definitely following Jay. Let's see if the stream element is actually working today. Let's give a little love to Jay real quick. I'm sure every single person here is following my man Jay, though. The J Buzz Nation, the combination. J Buzz Nation, it's the combination. We bring in the fire every single week. You don't want to miss any of these shows. And then, of course, Defense Diaries is going to be coming through this week with some lives also. And it's going to be fire. Joannie, I know I'm butchering it. Joni. Is it Joni? It's Joni. It's Joni. Okay. I can't read sometimes, guys. Kyle, good morning. What's going on? Thank you very much. Chickadee. I can read a chickadee. I can read a damn chickadee. I can't even keep up with this chat right now. It's going crazy. It's going fucking crazy. You guys are amazing. Seriously. Holy crap. We are about to get into it. Woo! We are about to get into it, folks. Week 19. We are still hanging out with Dr. Dietz. We're still going to be probably hanging out with Dr. Dietz all day long today as well. Dr. Dietz, we're on part 4 of his testimony. This one right here we're starting out with is an hour and 10 minutes. And I believe, am I wrong on this, Jay, that Joe Jackalone has a live stream today about 2, if I'm not mistaken? Hey, what's funny? We did reach it Friday night at one point, and then it went back down a little bit, just like I was complaining about. They always just kind of trickle in and out. So we got to hit another one to push it well past those digits. 2. Okay, cool. Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Jackalone is coming on at 2. So let me set up the portal as well. So you're not going to want to miss that. He's been coming through on Sundays with absolute bangers, folks. He brings the knowledge. He brings the experience. And he brings the personality. He's entertaining as hell. So what do we got here? Where's Joe? Here we go. Right here. Boom. Set up. What is it like to be an undercover vice cop in NYC? That sounds amazing already. As you can see, he is going to be coming through with the fire probably weekly. So, hell yeah. It's happening, baby. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's go in here and, first I got to make sure the sound is right. Wow, I don't even have the thing set up. Okay, give me 2 seconds here. And we're on Halloween still. Hell yeah. Boom. Boom. Let me get this going here. Yeah, this was still set up from Tuesday's members only live when I did sort of like the slideshow. So give me 1 second here, guys. Just want to make sure I can get this the proper size so it looks the best. Again, thank you all for hanging out, making this experience worth it every single week. Let's see how I can get my boom. Court TV, get the hell out of here. No one wants to see your dumb logo. Even though I'm really loving Court TV here recently. They've actually got a lot of good coverage and stuff. Let's see. And then let's do the sound. Get the sound going. Hell yeah.
Dr. Dietz, did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state at the time of the first-degree intentional homicide of Curtis Straughter, that is, on February 17, 1991?
Well, I didn't evaluate it on that day, of course, but I did evaluate his mental state on that day.
As of that day, right? Would you share with the jury your findings with respect to whether Mr. Dahmer appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Curtis Straughter?
And the bot didn't work.
The evidence bearing on that question in this case is the same as it is with all of the others. That is, that he ensured that there were no witnesses to the killing, that he told me that he in fact appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct at the time of all of the killings, and the steps that he took to avoid detection, disposing of most of the remains of Mr. Straughter. In addition, Mr. Dahmer told me about one incident that occurred. Apparently, by coincidence, there was another murder in the same apartment building around this time, shortly after he killed Mr. Straughter, and that caused Mr. Dahmer to fear that something had been discovered about his own activities, and he expressed relief when a detective investigating this unrelated homicide had come to his apartment, briefly looked around, but not discovered any of the evidence. And so that is an indication of his appreciation of the wrongfulness of his conduct, that he feared detection.
As a result of your observation and your findings, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not Mr. Dahmer appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Curtis Straughter?
Yes, based on all of the evidence, I reached the opinion with reasonable medical certainty that at the time Mr. Dahmer killed Curtis Straughter, he possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Would you share with the jury your findings as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he slayed Curtis Straughter?
Yes, and in addition to the evidence that's true for most or all of the cases, such as drinking alcohol to decrease his inhibitions and taking these elaborate steps to be alone with the victim, there were some particular preparations that Mr. Dahmer made prior to this killing. Namely, it was before this killing that he purchased a black nylon strap from a hardware store for use in strangling victims. And it was in advance of this particular killing that he purchased a pair of handcuffs from an Army surplus store. And he used the handcuffs to restrain Mr. Straughter and used the black strap to strangle him. As he described it to me, quote, "He was gay and he wanted anal sex, so I made the drink mixture. He fell asleep, used the handcuffs. This was the first time I used handcuffs. Strangled him, took pictures." End quote. So that description indicates that at the time of this homicide, he was not behaving impulsively, but rather was engaging in planful action. In addition to the motives characteristic of the majority of the killings, in this case, he had the additional motive of avoiding anal receptive activity that this victim had desired. The planned nature of the activity, the preparations of buying supplies in advance of the activity, incapacitating the victim with handcuffs while drugged and before killing him, are all indications that this is not an impulsive activity, but rather a planned and a more careful activity. And of course here, as with all of the charged homicides, there's no indication at all of Mr. Dahmer desiring to kill the people or feeling any compulsion to kill them. On the contrary, he wished various kinds of sexual activity and found the killing an unnecessary, an unpleasant, but sometimes necessary task.
Keeping in mind your observations and your findings with respect to this particular slaying, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not Jeffrey Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he killed Curtis Straughter?
Yes, I did.
And what is that opinion?
In my opinion, at the time that Jeffrey Dahmer killed Curtis Straughter, he possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
And is that opinion within a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes, it is.
Did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state as of the time that he killed Lindsay Errol, first-degree intentional homicide, Errol Lindsay, as of the 7th of April, 1991?
Yes, I did.
Would you share with the jury your findings with respect to whether Mr. Dahmer appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Errol Lindsay?
Well, in this instance, in addition to all of the general evidence that's true for each of the homicides, there is a change in Mr. Dahmer's technique that's informative about whether or not he appreciated wrongfulness. And that is, this is the first of the instances in which he drilled a hole into his victim's skull. And here, Mr. Dahmer reported that he first drugged Mr. Lindsay and thereafter used what he described as the drilling technique on the top of his skull. And we discussed this in some detail. In the course of that discussion, he said that after initially having drilled the hole and injected I would call it a syringe, it's a baster actually, a syringe full of muriatic acid into the cranial cavity of Mr. Lindsay, that Mr. Lindsay woke up, and when he regained consciousness, Mr. Dahmer said he was groggy when he woke up, but still coherent and aware of his surroundings, and so I figured it was a failure. Gave him more sleeping pills, he fell asleep, then I strangled him. That indicates not only that the behavior was not impulsive, considering the planning and the various activities that went into this, including buying the baster to use, but it also is an indication that there was no compulsion to kill, because what Mr. Dahmer wanted here was the compliant sex partner, the zombie as he described it, rather than to have a corpse. It was his intention to keep this man alive if that was going to work, but when he concluded that he had failed to achieve the compliant partner with no will, only then did he strangle him. So what's another way to look at it is that when he couldn't have the zombie-like creation he was hoping for, he was willing to settle for a corpse, and the strangulation is a means to that end, and of course to avoid the problem that would result if he were to call an ambulance at that time or to send the man home.
Me too, Fuzzy Pup. That'd be awesome.
Or to take him.
It would be 3 days. Oh, God, it'd be longer than that. Good Lord. How many days have we been here?
Somewhere where he might be able to retain memory of what happened and identify his assailant. We discussed in further detail what he had in mind here, and in that discussion, he told me that when Mr. Lindsay had regained consciousness, he said, "What time is it?" and was complaining of a headache, obviously, but he wasn't in a zombie-like state as I had desired. I asked him in that discussion the question, "You didn't expect him to wake up and say, 'Yes, master'?" And he said, no, but that was the general idea, that pliability of the will. I asked him what his model was for that. And he said, "I didn't have any model. It was a hit or miss experimentation." Shortly thereafter, I asked where he got the idea that he might be able to knock out the resistance center or the will while keeping the other mental faculties intact, because that was a theory of some philosophers and physicians a century ago that might be possible. And he said, well, I knew the intelligence was supposed to be seated in the frontal lobe, so that's where I directed the injection. He said, but I didn't know exactly what would happen. It never did work. I asked him if he had heard of frontal lobotomies, a kind of surgical procedure, and he said that he had. And I asked if that's what he was doing there, and he said it was. Later, in that same conversation, he said, quote, "I was just trying to disable the will." And I asked, "And subject them to your will?" And he said, "Right."
Just read the last part.
Morning, Austin. Thank you for being here.
Very last thing you said.
The question, "And subject them to your will?" Answer, "Right."
Do you recall, Doctor, whether he had indicated at any time that he had done any reading or read anything on that subject, if you recollect?
Well, I sought to engage him in a conversation about Hollywood movies about zombies, or whether he'd read about the voodoo rituals about zombies, and I believe he said that all that he'd been exposed to was the Hollywood versions from movies. I'm sorry, I forget which question we were on, whether it was wrongfulness or conduct.
You were considering the wrongfulness aspect of it, of his conduct with respect to Mr. Straughter.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lindsay, forgive me.
Mr. Dahmer also told me that he had, in this instance, used a small paring knife to try to remove the skin from Mr. Lindsay, and I asked him where he placed him while he did that, and he said on the bedroom floor. I said, on top of what? And he said, a plastic sheet. I said, to prevent, and he responded, prevent leakage of blood. And I said, and staining the floor? And he said, mm-hmm. I asked if there were carpeting there, and he said there was. And I asked these questions in part because I'd seen a photograph of that victim on a plastic sheet and that Mr. Dahmer had taken, and also because I knew that there'd been carpet cleaners brought in to whom he gave some other explanation. That is, he didn't volunteer that it was human blood. Those efforts to prevent blood stains on the carpet and the use of a plastic sheet to do it, I see as evidence of appreciating the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Keeping in mind the observations you made of him, and particularly your findings in this regard, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether the defendant, Mr. Dahmer, had substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct at the time that he killed Errol Lindsay?
Yes, I did.
And what is that opinion?
In my opinion, at the time that Mr. Dahmer killed Errol Lindsay, he possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct, and this is an opinion with reasonable medical certainty.
Would you share with the jury your findings as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he slayed Errol Lindsay?
Yo, who the fuck's coming through this chat right now? Looks like Cammy Q's coming through this chat, passing the offering plate. $4.99. Thank you very much.
Give it up, give it up.
Oh, shit. Thank you very much, Cammy. Appreciate the hell out of that. Thank you, thank you. Everybody, again, hanging and banging this morning. Murder Church growing every single week with the live crowd and the rewatches that come through. Can't appreciate it. I do appreciate it. Can't say enough about what you guys do here. Any new folks, please hit the like, first of all. Share this out to your communities. Let folks know that you're hanging out here with me on Publicly Buzzed Live for Murder Church. And, yeah, sub up. Sub up. You're going to want to stick around. Shit's getting good. Let's just say that. Holy shit, Dizzy. I forgot the bells. I'm leaving. I forgot the bells. Jesus fucking Christ. Okay. All right. We got to start the bells. That's why Viv has not said shit. That's why Viv probably ain't even... I didn't summon Viv. I didn't even summon her. She loves the bells. Well, the bells are going to be coming now. Let's see if we can get her in here. Hold on. Woo. We're late. We're running late. We don't have bells. Murder Church is not official. Dr. Dietz is on the stand. None of this is official. Son of a bitch. Son of a bitch. That's on me. I'm firing myself. Hold on. You're fired. Get the hell out of here, bud. You're fired. Done fucked up. Murder Church, the only church where the pastor says, Jesus fucking Christ. You're damn right. Another round of bells. Why not? Another round of bells. Wow. Can't believe I forgot the bells. I am embarrassed about that. You want to see me get embarrassed? I'm embarrassed about that.
In addition to the facts that are true for each of the cases, there are the facts that I just described about settling for a corpse instead of the compliant, zombie-like sexual partner he'd hoped for. The fact that Mr. Dahmer was attempting to obtain this living but compliant partner indicates that there was no compulsion to kill, but rather a desire to have a sexual partner of a particular type. In fact, a living type would have been preferable. Also, as I described earlier, his statements that what he was attempting to do was to destroy the will of the other person and subject that person to his will is an indication that at the time of doing this, he had a will. That is, he had the capacity to make decisions and control his behavior. What he sought to do was to take that capacity away from someone else. It was also in this case that I asked the more general question while we were discussing this case, would you be drinking while you dismembered them? And he said, oh yeah, sure, yeah. I said, why? And he replied, I was thirsty. That made it easier, the alcohol. I asked, why'd you need that help? And he responded, it just made it easier to do the job. I asked, which was an unattractive job? And he replied, hard work, yeah, it was. I asked, was it hard work or was it repulsive to do this? And he said both. And that's an indication that the behavior during the dismemberment was not impulsive behavior and not compulsive behavior, and that he had no drive or desire to do the dismembering, although there were parts of it that were useful to him, such as being able to see the viscera and mementos he would keep. In general, the dismemberment was for the purpose of disposing.
Uh-oh. Joanne, what are you doing? Passing the plate to the left-hand side. $5. Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate the hell out of that.
Give me the loot! Give me the loot!
Love it. Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate that.
Disposing of evidence of his crimes.
As a result of those observations and your findings, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he slayed Errol Lindsay?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
In my opinion, with reasonable medical certainty, at the time of killing Errol Lindsay, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
Did there come a time that you evaluated, strike that, did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state at the time that he slayed Tony Hughes? That is on or about May 24, 1991.
Yes, I did.
Would you share with the jury your findings with respect to whether Mr. Dahmer appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Tony Hughes?
Here the evidence is as it is with the cases generally, of having brought the victim to a private location, of having taken steps to avoid detection, particularly dismembering and disposing of the remains.
What did Tango Crochet just do? $5. Bells bring the happy, passing the plate around. You're absolutely right. I can't believe, first of all, that I forgot the bells.
Give me the loot! Give me the loot!
And, yeah, I feel the official start of Murder Church, the beginning, the first 25 minutes of Murder Church don't even count today. I may have to go in and edit the first 25 minutes of this out just for my own sanity. I may put that on like its own little video section, right? Yeah, because it's not official. It's not official until the bells ring in the morning. And I've screwed up. I've screwed up big time. I have to, I don't know, punish myself somehow. And then I see Jay coming through here bringing the truth, ladies and gentlemen. Bringing the truth. If Dan's watching right now, huh? Keanu is bae.
I'm sober enough to know what I'm doing.
Let's go.
Drunk enough to really enjoy doing it.
Keanu is bae. Absolutely.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Keanu Reeves, welcome to the party, pal.
Give me the loot. Give me the loot.
I'm telling you like it is, baby.
That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate that, brother. And preaching. And then Tangle Crochet. I thought I saw something else down here. Gifting out a membership. Dilly Pickles going to grab that. Dilly Pickles, welcome. Dilly Pickles is now. First of all, let's welcome them in.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Crack one open and do some satisfying pours for Dilly Pickles and get those beers passed out in chat. Dilly Pickles, you are now in for the members only live streams every 2 Tuesdays. So this coming Tuesday, it's going to be a video being dropped of this past members only live. The only catch is it's an edited version. So you're not going to miss any of the fuck ups and me trying to figure this thing out as we continue going forward. So yeah, you're going to be in on that, Dilly Pickles. So you're going to be, hopefully you're excited. Hell, maybe he's like, fuck, I don't want to watch that shit. Thank you very much, everybody coming through here, making this chat pop right now. You are the real MVPs.
Though in this case, he did not dismember and dispose of the remains immediately, but rather not until after he had killed yet another victim. There was a short delay here because that other victim was killed 3 days later. And ordinarily, Mr. Dahmer, if he could, would spend 2 or 3 days with the victim intact so that he could enjoy them sexually during that period. And of course, there's Mr. Dahmer's more general statement that he appreciated the wrongfulness at the time of each of these killings.
Was this also done again within the confines of his private premises, the slaying of Tony Hughes?
Yes.
As a result of your observations and these particular findings, did you form an opinion within a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether Mr. Dahmer appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct or had the capacity, substantial capacity, to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he slayed Tony Hughes?
Yes, based on all of the evidence, it's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that at the time of killing Mr. Hughes, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Would you share with the jury your findings as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time of the slaying of Tony Hughes?
Yes. Here, in addition to the more general points that are true in all or nearly all the cases, there's one very specific point, namely that in this instance, Mr. Dahmer didn't try to kill Tony Hughes, but rather Mr. Hughes died through the foreseeable but unintended consequence of this drilling technique. He drilled a hole into his skull and poured in acid, and Mr. Hughes died then, even though it was Mr. Dahmer's intention to keep him alive in this altered state. And so there's no compulsion here to kill. He'd rather he not have died. And it was not any impulsive act of killing, but rather a planful act of trying to provide himself with a compliant sexual partner.
Cal knows.
As a result of your general observations of the matter and with respect to your particular findings on this, in this case, did you form an opinion within a reasonable degree of professional certainty as to whether Mr. Dahmer, at the time he slayed Tony Hughes, possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law?
In my opinion, with reasonable medical certainty, at the time of killing Mr. Hughes, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
Did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state as of the time that he slayed or engaged in the first-degree intentional homicide of Konerak Sinthasomphone, that is on May 27, 1991?
Yes, I did.
Would you share with the jury your findings with respect to whether Mr. Dahmer possessed the substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Konerak Sinthasomphone?
Here, in addition to the more general evidence characteristic of all 15 of the charged killings, there's also evidence that emerges from the specific events that transpired when Mr. Sinthasomphone walked out of the apartment and was encountered by all of the citizens and by law enforcement people and fire department personnel. And in that instance, Mr. Dahmer communicated to police in the presence of other witnesses in a manner indicating that Mr. Dahmer appreciated the wrongfulness of the conduct he had engaged in with that victim to that point, namely by giving a false name for the victim and misleading police as to the nature of their relationship so as to be able to retain custody, as it were, of this victim and have the police go away. And he was able, of course, to behave in such a manner that the police believed him. With respect to whether he appreciated the wrongfulness, not only does his misleading the police in order to try to evade detection here show an appreciation of wrongfulness, but also his telling them an untrue story instead of the true story is such an indication. The true story would have been, yes, I know this man, I've been making a zombie of him by drilling a hole in his brain. And
is never not weird to hear. I don't care. I've been hearing that my whole life about this story because it's always been famous. And it's always the most shocking thing ever, and it still continues to be, no matter how many times you freaking say it.
That's a story he didn't tell. So
I haven't been on Twitter today to see any of the new fights over the weekend. If I see any good ones here, I might bring them over. My Twitter, if anybody has been paying attention, has just been destroyed with fights because I cannot stop watching them, and it's ruined my algorithm, and I'm mad about it and also not mad about it.
And he didn't tell that because he knew that that was not going to preserve his freedom best, but rather he gave them a story about this being a friend who does such things when he drinks too much, which proved to be a successful cover story for the moment. And his thinking on his feet to create that cover story and to evade detection even when the victim has just wandered out onto the street is an indication of his appreciation of the wrongfulness that comes right in the midst of the activity that brought about.
Hey, real quick, every person in here right now that on Twitter retweeted and shared this out, I'm seeing that right now. You guys fucking rule. Thank you so much. That's so fucking cool to see, man. There's so many today. Wow, for real. You guys are the MVPs of this shit. Making this go, man. That is what all this is about, man. That's so fucking cool. Wow, that blew me away.
This young man's death.
Doctor, did he tell you whether or not he had engaged in the drilling enterprise before he left and went to the tavern?
Yes.
On that occasion, then he went to the tavern and then sighted Konerak Sinthasomphone naked on the street. Is that correct?
Exactly.
All right. So, and I know you are a psychiatrist and not a pathologist, but did he indicate to you what type of an injection he used?
Dizzy, coming through. I see you. I see you, Dizzy. Coming through with the $2.99, passing the plate, and Dizzy also saw the share. Kidding me? You kidding me? Easiest thing in the world to do, share out content for people that you support, and it's fucking happening. You guys are fucking awesome, bro. Love it. And I see Viv coming through here. Sorry, Steve. We are heading on a romantic mountain getaway in a minute. Oh, my God. Just popping in to say hey. And I'm going to miss you today. This morning, Publicly Buzzed this morning, I was getting stuff ready for Jay. Oh, my God. Well, first of all, be safe on your journey, Viv. And that sounds amazing. Have a great time. Is Mr. Darcy coming along? Is he being babysitted by someone else? I'd imagine he is upset if he does not get to go on the romantic getaway in the mountains. Wow, Viv. That's awesome. Well, Viv, while you're still in here real quick, I'm going to get you with the bells. And no one say anything about earlier. No one tell her about earlier. Boom. Boom. Love that.
That he injected after the drilling technique?
Before Mr. Sinthasomphone walked out, he
Yes.
had injected, I believe, an entire syringe full of this muriatic acid into the brain.
Would that,
cavity.
do you know or can you advise the jury as to what effect that would have with respect to whether there would be bleeding? What effect that acid might have on the potential for that head to be bleeding?
I can't offer an expert opinion on that.
In terms of the size of the drill bit, was there any discussion about that?
Yes.
Either in this or the earlier events?
Yes.
I think you had discussed that. Was it a very small or large? Can you share that with the jury?
I tried to determine the size by asking if it was the size of a 20-gauge needle, and we didn't share an understanding of what size that was, nor did we could we identify a drill bit size that would properly describe it. However, Mr. Dahmer said that the portion that went from the syringe into the brain cavity was about the size of the cartridge of an ordinary ballpoint pen. And so I believe that to be a very small hole.
That would be the cartridge, the narrow, often plastic that contains the ink within a ballpoint pen?
Yes.
Right. As a result of your discussions with Mr. Dahmer with respect to that incident, your observations, did you form an opinion within a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not, at the time of the slaying of Konerak, Sinthasomphone, Jeffrey Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct?
Based on all of the information available to me, it's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that at the time of killing Konerak Sinthasomphone, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Would you share with the jury your findings as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time of the slaying of Konerak Sinthasomphone?
Yes, in addition to the other evidence that's true for all of the homicides, or most of them, in this instance, Mr. Dahmer explained that he was trying to create a zombie-like state for his victim so that he would have a compliant sexual partner.
But Mr. Darcy is pumped to be headed to the mountains, baby. That's awesome. All right, yeah, get Mr. Darcy, extra Chick-fil-A on the way. Hell yeah, that's awesome. That's what I like to see. It here.
But that this did not go as he had planned.
Be careful.
That is an indication that
be careful. Don't. Be careful.
He was not behaving impulsively. That is, he had a plan that led to the drilling, nor did he have any compulsion to kill. His desire was to create this zombie-like state. When Mr. Dahmer was in the presence of the civilians and the police and fire personnel outside, and the victim was there, he was able to hear the police ask if anyone knew this man, Konerak Sinthasomphone, and no one else there knew him. But then Mr. Dahmer identified himself, showed his ID, and took Konerak's Sinthasomphone back home with him in the company of the police. This meant that he had a problem on his hands. He had a young man on whom he'd performed a trephination procedure, a drilling into the skull. He had injected acid into the brain, and the police had seen him with this person. At that point, he has a dilemma in that if he were to allow Konerak's Sinthasomphone to live, he can be identified as a person with him during this incident. And the police have already been in the apartment and know where.
God, hey, thanks for hanging out the little bit you did today. Appreciate the support. That's fucking amazing. Like, and I hope the Saints win. I don't watch football. I don't watch football, but I hope the Saints win.
Jeffrey Dahmer
For you, Todd,
gave the ID.
If anybody else in here is going against Todd's Saints team, then that sucks.
Lives. So now his only available option is to either make the victim someone who's actually a zombie and can not tell on him and wouldn't be observed to be abnormal, or else he'll have to kill him and dispose of the body. He can't allow that body to remain intact because he'd be identified as the person who was with it. And Mr. Dahmer told me that after the police left, he gave a second injection of muriatic acid, and that proved fatal. But even then, he was attempting to carry out the plan to create a zombie. His words were, "Then I gave him the second injection of muriatic acid, and that was fatal. I didn't intend it to be, but it was." In other words, there was no compulsion to kill him. The death was the unintended consequence of doing this to the man. I asked later what really caused his death was the second dose, and he said, right. I asked him how long that had been after the police left, and he said it was about an hour. And I said, and your intent of injecting that at that point was what? And he said, to produce a zombie-like state. This indicates that Mr. Dahmer waited until out of the presence of the police.
Good Sunday, Joanne.
Before injecting an additional quantity of muriatic acid, which not only shows that he would have known it was wrong to ask their assistance in doing the injection, but also that he has the capacity to wait that additional amount of time before going forward with that particular procedure. I discussed further with him what his understanding would be of what would occur, since this wasn't the first time that he'd made such injections. And he said that he didn't know what would happen. Quote, I was still experimenting. I didn't know what. I was still trying to make it work. I asked if he took notes on any of this, because he'd used the word experimentation. He said no. And I said, you didn't fancy yourself a scientist? And he said no, which is an indication that he knew what he was doing and wasn't operating under some belief that he was a mad scientist or a scientist actually making zombies. He was attempting to produce the sexual partners.
I just gotta make sure we don't mix him up with being a mad scientist or anything, guys. He's not doing experiments here.
Now, in all of the instances, that is, with respect to every killing, there are...
Oh, Joe! Hey, Joe, I've got this ready to teleport portal people to your stream that starts at 2 p.m., sir. Thank you for coming through here. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks, you. Appreciate it. Starry Crystal, thanks for coming through here also. He was obsessed with creating zombies. Yeah. Bobby, thank you for being here. You're absolutely amazing. Loving this community. Great community. Always coming through.
Proximal witnesses, some laymen and some...
Holy shit, it's working. Finally woke up. We just needed Joe to come through to wake stream elements up. Hell yeah. That's awesome.
Health professionals of various kinds who had contact with Mr. Dahmer before the killing and after the killing, sometimes in very close proximity, and who had occasion to make observations about his behavior. But in this particular case, there is, in addition, a set of witnesses who had occasion to observe Mr. Dahmer's behavior in the midst of what turn out to be the activities that led to the death, namely the 2 injections of acid into the brain. And the accounts of those witnesses are therefore informative of Mr. Dahmer's mental state at the time of that offense, because that's in the midst of the offense. And those witnesses saw
And I think he may even go into next week, Shelley. He's on here for a long-ass time.
no evidence of the signs or symptoms of any mental disorder that could cause one to lack substantial capacity to conform one's conduct to the requirements of the law, or to fail to appreciate the wrongfulness of one's conduct.
To put it in the form then, sir, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not, at the time of the slaying of Konerak, Sinthasomphone, the defendant, Jeffrey Dahmer, possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law?
Yes, I did.
And what was that opinion?
In my opinion, Mr. Dahmer, at the time of killing Konerak, Sinthasomphone, possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
Did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state as of the time that he slayed, engaged in first-degree intentional homicide of Matt Turner, that being on June 30, 1991?
Yes, I did.
Would you share with the jury your findings with respect to whether Mr. Dahmer appreciated or possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Matt Turner?
In addition to Mr. Dahmer's statement that he appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct at the time of each of the killings, there is the evidence that Mr. Dahmer brought Mr. Turner to his home. In fact, brought him all the way from Chicago back to his apartment. And he told me that he'd paid for Mr. Turner's ticket. He took steps to avoid detection, which included what he referred to as defleshing, and throwing the flesh out.
Defleshing. Did you hear that? Defleshing.
Out in the trash.
Yo, Jesse C. from Ireland. What's going on? Thank you for coming through here. Welcome in.
At this time, he said he didn't have any more acid, and so he wasn't able to acidify the tissues, but rather had to put intact tissue out in the trash. And he also told me that at this time he had a 57-gallon barrel and reported that the other ones that he had leaked too much odor, and this one was sturdy.
Lakota, what is going on, Lakota? Thank you for coming through here. Appreciate it.
At whatever time
Love your support.
he was concerned about the odor, that too would be an indication of his appreciation of the wrongfulness. So I think that was prior to bringing Mr. Turner back. He had meant, in addition, to dispose of certain other portions of the remains of Mr. Turner, but had run into a practical problem in that because a plastic bag containing some of the remains of Mr. Turner had frozen to the...
Yeah. Dixie, I'm glad I didn't eat anything this morning. Yuck. That is one thing, you know, if you have a weak stomach coming in here. Again, nothing visual. It's just the dialogue that's actually spoken, the actual words that are spoken in this trial that will, it'll get you. I mean, especially if you have a weak stomach.
Bottom of his freezer, And Mr.
A
Dahmer
stummy.
said he was unable
A weak
to
stummy.
remove that, and meant to eventually thaw out the freezer so he could remove and dispose of those remains. And that desire to dispose of those remains is an indication of his appreciation of the wrongfulness.
As a result of your observations, and particularly your findings with respect to this death, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Matt Turner?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
In my opinion, at the time of his killing of Matt Turner, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct.
And is that to
Good point. Good point, Shannon. No, good point.
degree of medical certainty, a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that opinion?
Yes, it is.
Would you share with the jury your findings as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he killed Matt Turner?
Well, Mr. Dahmer had met Mr. Turner in Chicago and, of course, did not undertake to kill him there, but rather bought him a bus ticket, brought him the whole way from Chicago to Milwaukee, and only when behind closed doors at his own apartment did Mr. Dahmer engage in his usual procedure of drugging the man's drink and then strangling him. That sequence of activities indicates that this is not an impulsive act because he is delaying gratification and behaving planfully and carrying out a predetermined plan. And in addition, the fact that Mr. Dahmer indicated that he never felt compelled to kill the men is an indication of his capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. Finally, there's the evidence that's common to the cases in general, in which Mr. Dahmer's indicated that had there been a witness, he would have refrained, and had the man agreed to remain with him voluntarily, he would have refrained.
Keeping in mind your observations and your findings with respect to this particular case, did you form an opinion within a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he slayed Matt Turner?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
It's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that at the time of killing Matt Turner, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
Did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state as of the time that he engaged in the first-degree intentional homicide of Jeremiah Weinberger, that being on July 5, 1991?
Yes, I did.
Would you share with the jury your findings with respect to whether Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he slayed Jeremiah Weinberger?
In addition to the general features that are true for each case, here Mr. Dahmer also was concerned about disposal of the remains, though began to have difficulty. He said that he left the body in the bathtub with cold water and bleach so that it wouldn't start smelling. And that statement that he put bleach in the bathtub and left the water cold to prevent the odors that would arise from decomposition is an indication that Mr. Dahmer appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct because he was taking steps to prevent detection. I asked him whether the reason he had done that rather than the usual procedure was because he was running out of space. And he said that was so, but also he was running out of energy and didn't have the energy to do the so-called defleshing. So there were practical reasons for his varying the means by which he was disposing of the evidence. He confirmed that it was 5 or 6 days thereafter that he obtained the drum, the 57-gallon drum, for which the bill of lading showed a 7/12/91 purchase date. And obtaining that drum to assist him in disposing of the evidence is an additional indication of his appreciation of the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Was the drum partly selected, as far as you could determine from talking with Mr. Dahmer, that it would provide greater insurance against leakage of odors?
Exactly.
As a result of the observations you made of him, and particularly your findings with respect to this matter, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty as to whether Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Jeremiah Weinberger?
Yes.
And what did you conclude?
That at the time Mr. Dahmer killed Mr. Weinberger, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct.
And was that to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that opinion?
Yes.
Would you share with the jury your findings as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he slayed Jeremiah Weinberger?
In addition to the evidence that's generally true, in this case in particular, these statements made by Mr. Dahmer, he said, after bringing Mr. Weinberger back, quote, "I make the drink, he falls asleep, drill, 1 injection, this time of boiling water, thinking it would be less corrosive than the muriatic acid. After a few hours, he wakes up, is semi-coherent, coherent enough that he knows who he is. He's not in a zombie-like state, so I give him more pills, give him a 2nd injection. He goes into a coma. I go to work, come back the next morning, he's still alive. During the day, I try to get him to come around, try to get him to drink water. He never comes out of the coma. Go to work again another night, come back the next morning, and he's died by this time. I used boiling water with both injections this time, so that was a failure too." That description of what brought about the death of Mr. Weinberger shows that Mr. Dahmer was not acting under any compulsion to kill Mr. Weinberger, but rather was attempting to create for himself a compliant sexual partner. And
holy shit, it's the debut of Ricky Cougarback in Murder Church. To even this extent of being in the chat, I think. I don't think he's even appeared in the chat. Holy shit. Ricky Cougarback is debuting on Murder Church, ladies and gentlemen, now making his way down the aisle. Gonna get a couple of these right here, real quick. Give me these.
Dan's are fantastic.
And one of these. Huh? Bells for Dan. Welcome. Welcome. Kaylin, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. That's awesome.
In fact, the death was an unintended consequence, a byproduct of that effort to create a zombie.
Welcome.
Also, the efforts he made to preserve the life of Mr. Weinberger in this state are an indication that he wasn't behaving impulsively at the time, but rather was behaving planfully and deliberately. I specifically asked about that by saying, "What did you do to try to revive him?" And Mr. Dahmer's response was, sat him up in the bed, tried to get him to drink some water, talk with him, moved his arms around. He was the only one that found, he was the only one that found him lying on the floor with his eyes wide open, and that struck me as very strange because the rest of them died with their eyes closed. They were wide open when I came back, so I don't know why that would be. The reason I share that passage is that it's an indication that Mr. Dahmer was surprised to find him dead, that is, didn't know that he would return to find him dead, that he didn't want him to die at that time. He wanted him to live and tried to get him to drink water. And this is an indication that Mr. Dahmer has no compulsion to kill.
From these observations and your findings on this particular count, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional medical certainty as to whether Mr. Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that Jeremiah Weinberger died?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
You damn right, Jay. Get him out of here. Keanu for life, baby. I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. Dave, what's going on? What's going on, Dave?
That at the time of the actions that led to the death of Mr. Weinberger, it's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that Mr. Dahmer possessed.
Charlotte, what are you doing? Don't encourage it. Don't encourage it. I saw it. I remember. Agreeing. Yesterday in Discord. No.
I'm telling you like it is, baby.
Lakota coming through with the $4.99. Well, miracles do happen. Not Deacon Dan. Pretty Ricky is what they called him. Holy shit. Getting a little love anyways. Dan? Still getting love, even though you do not like Keanu Reeves. Joe Jack Alone in the chat right now. How do you feel about Keanu Reeves?
Substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
Did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state as of the time that he slayed, as of the time of the first-degree intentional homicide of Oliver Lacy? That is, as of July 15, 1991.
Yes, I did.
Would you share with the jury your findings with respect to whether Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Oliver Lacy?
Well, this beginning with the killing of Oliver Lacy, there had been some changes in Mr. Dahmer's life, and specifically, he described how after killing Mr. Weinberger, he had changed his habits in some ways. I asked him why he hadn't taken the time to catch up with the disposal problem that he'd created for himself, because he had too much work to do to destroy evidence and was running into a problem here. And he said,
Wrong.
getting sloppy for some reason, and things were falling apart.
Not right. Lies.
He also said that after killing Jeremiah Weinberger, but only after killing Jeremiah Weinberger, did he begin to drink even more than in the past. Whereas at the time of the other killings, in general, Mr. Dahmer had limited his drinking to weekends and had modulated the dose to achieve the desired effect. Here he began drinking in heavier doses. And so a number of events began to occur in rapid succession around the time of the last two killings with which Mr. Dahmer is charged that complicate the assessment of his mental state at the time of these offenses. I pointed out to him that the records indicated that on the 13th of July, 2 days before Mr. Lacy appears to have been killed, he had called into work with a phony excuse about his grandmother being sick, and he said that that was right, that he thinks he was with the next to the last victim at the time that he made that call to try to avoid getting into trouble at work. And I pointed out to him that his employer had said that he would have to bring proof that his grandmother was ill, like a note from the doctor, and that was a problem. And he admitted how that was a problem because he wasn't going to be able to find a doctor to certify that when it wasn't true. And he said, that's when I got fired. That's when I started drinking every day. So it is, as far as I can tell, at the time that he is with Oliver Lacy, and I don't know whether he has yet killed Oliver Lacy, when he calls to work. I gather, however, that he hadn't yet killed Oliver Lacy from the dates available to me, when he calls for work to try to get out of coming in. I pointed out to him, you really got your hands full there. You have an apartment full of bodies in various states, and you've been fired. And he said, right. I said, and you're out of money. He said, what happened? That's when things start falling apart. That spelled the end of things, pretty much. I asked, so you began drinking even more? And he replied, every day after I lost the job. And with the second to last guy, did the drugging, strangling, no drilling, picture taking, dismembering, more picture taking. Well, that account that he first drugs the victim before strangling him is again an indication of his behaving as he had at the time of the earlier homicides, despite
Tim Roth's a pretty good actor too, Charlotte.
the greater number of stressors in his life. And likewise, he indicated that he initiated the process of disposing of the remains
Right?
of Mr. Lacy by saying that he defleshed both Weinberger and Lacy at the same time. So the behaviors that I do know about with respect to the killing of Oliver Lacy are consistent with the behaviors at the time of the earlier incidents, in that he took the victim to a private location before killing him, suggesting a knowledge of an appreciation of wrongfulness, that he took steps to avoid detection.
This is how you start a war, baby. This is how you start a war, a Keanu war. Now, see, Tim Roth has entered the conversation as well. What is going on out here in this chat?
Which has the same implication, and his general statement that he appreciated the wrongfulness at the time of all of the killings. But something is changing about the level of stress in Mr. Dahmer's life at this point.
From your observations and your findings in regard to this particular count, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Oliver Lacy?
Well, from that information that I just gave alone, I wouldn't be able to, but based on everything that I know about the case and all of
Dan is splitting the family. He's split them right down the middle, splitting us right down the middle. My God, we can't take this any too much longer. We can't have Keanu Reeves coming into this conversation. He's ripping us apart. Ripping us apart.
the other evidence that Mr. Dahmer subsequently told me about, I was able to form the opinion with reasonable medical certainty that at the time of killing Oliver Lacy, Mr. Dahmer
Ricky, get on here.
possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Would you share with the jury your findings as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he slayed Oliver Lacy?
The evidence there is merely the evidence that's common to all of the cases, with one exception, which is here.
I'm losing my voice.
Indicated that he's drinking heavily every day. And so although he told me in general that he drank to decrease his inhibitions at the time of the killing, it seems to me that there's independent evidence to suggest that he was drinking very heavily all the time for the few days between being fired and the time of his arrest. And so he may not have been drinking specifically to reduce inhibitions here, since he was drinking heavily more generally. Apart from that, however, the evidence indicates that he brought the victim back to a place where he could have him
Oh,
alone,
shit.
that he didn't
I'm telling you like it is, baby.
I don't believe you.
I'm sober enough to know what I'm doing, and I'm drunk enough to really enjoy doing it.
I don't remember asking you a goddamn thing.
There it is. Hey, Dad. Hey, Ricky.
I don't remember asking you a goddamn thing.
One more.
I don't remember asking you a goddamn thing.
kill him immediately upon finding his physique desirable, but rather did so only after he had made his usual preparations of being alone with him and drugging him. And there are, of course, Mr. Dahmer's general statements that at the time of each of the killings, he could have and would have refrained had there been a witness or had the victim agreed to stay voluntarily.
Keeping in mind your observations and those findings, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he slayed Oliver Lacy?
Considering
Yo, good morning, Doodlebugs. What's up?
all of the evidence,
Doodlebugs fart.
I formed the opinion with reasonable medical certainty that at the time of
Doodlebugs farts. What is your opinion on Keanu Reeves? Go.
killing Oliver Lacy, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
Did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state as of the time that he committed a... I'm sorry, sir.
I hadn't quite completed my last answer.
Forgive me.
I should have phrased it this way. I should have phrased the last answer that at the time of killing Oliver Lacy, there was no mental disease that would account for Mr. Dahmer lacking substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. However, there is a question in my mind as to...
Get MJ! Get MJ over here! And there we go right there. Another Keanu lover. Welcome to the church. Welcome in. Fart. Welcome in. Fart.
Oh man, I shot Marvin in the face.
Why the fuck you do that?
whether his intoxication at that time may have played a different role than it did at the time of the other killings.
Right, then, could you tell us if you do have an opinion then with respect to whether or not whether he had the substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law?
She already lurking, y'all. Already lurking up in this mother.
That's where there's some difficulty in forming a clear judgment. I am confident that there was no mental disease that impaired that capacity, but whether intoxication may have is another matter.
I see, and that would then,
If there was any impairment, it would have been due to intoxication.
and then that would be a matter of law for the court to instruct the jury as to the role of intoxication as a mental defense. Is that true?
Yes.
And there is specific instruction by the court addressing that issue. It will be. Did you evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's mental state as of the time of the slaying of Joseph Bradehoft, that is, as of July 19, 1991? And that was
Yes.
a first-degree intentional homicide.
Yes, I did.
Would you share with the jury your findings with respect to whether Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct when he killed Joseph Bradehoft?
This, too, occurs at a time of unusual stress in Mr. Dahmer's life. And here I asked him, why did you neglect Bradehoft's body so long?
Yo,
And
Emily,
he
what's
replied,
up?
fatigue, excessive drinking during the week. He wasn't terribly attractive
Came in at a perfect
to me.
time. How do you feel about
I
Keanu
asked,
Reeves?
"But why not dispose of it?" And he said, fatigue. I said, were you out of space too?
Keanu Reeves, you coming through? We gotta know.
He said, no,
I'm
no.
making a poll.
No, I had space in the freezer. No, if I hadn't, that was my undoing. If I had not run across Tracy Edwards at the mall just before I was ready to leave, it would have been a very different ending. I would have acidified what I had in the drum, and I was debating on whether to keep the skulls that I had or to just acidify everything and get rid of all of the evidence. because I knew I had to be leaving the apartment within a week or two. So if I hadn't met him, I would have just gone back and disposed of the rest of the evidence, probably.
The poll is out there. Love or hate. It's very simple. There's no middle ground here.
That is an indication to me that Mr. Dahmer, at the time of killing Joseph Bradehoft, was aware of the conflict between disposing of evidence and being too tired to do so, and that he therefore appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct and was concerned about being detected.
I definitely thought he was taller. 5'9"? Shit, we're the same height. Okay, now I feel real confident, motherfuckers. It just went up a whole nother level. Woo, Keanu confidence.
He went on to say, I was debating whether I should keep the skulls that were cleaned or whether I should just get rid of everything. I hadn't made up my mind yet, but I was definitely planning on acidifying the torsos that were in the blue drum. I asked,
crawling his way back. Dan just, oh no, I like Keanu. Well, yeah, no.
What were the two sides of the equation for you in keeping the skulls? In other words,
all right.
To ask him if he's making a decision, how is he balancing this judgment? He replied,
there we go.
I wanted to keep them because it would have been a total waste otherwise. That was my thinking. I know it was risky since I didn't have any other place to live lined up or a job, so I hadn't decided. I asked if you had kept them, how would you have stored them?
You're forgiven. You're forgiven.
Said,
it's fine.
In one of those rent-a-storage center places. Kept them in that metal filing cabinet that I had. It was lockable.
Okay. All right. Son of a bitch.
I asked, and you had several in there? And he indicated he did. I asked if it would have held them all, and he said, no, I probably would have had to keep some in the freezer after defleshing.
What are the other, Charlotte? What are the other? It's a very strict poll.
I asked, there was, in the freezer, there was one bag that was internal organs. And he said, right, that was from the guy in Chicago bus station, namely Mr. Turner. The only reason that was left in there was because it had frozen to the bottom of the freezer, and if I tried to pull it out, it would have ripped the bag.
Oh, sure.
And you would have liked to have gotten rid of that. And he replied, yeah. I asked, and how would you have gotten rid of that? And he said, I would have let it thaw out a bit and then pulled it out. So all of that goes to show that at the time of these events, Mr. Dahmer was concerned about disposing of evidence, and
everyone's opinion is getting put on the screen right now. Everybody's
getting rid of these remains and debating about the possibility of needing to get rid of all of the remains, including the ones that had become mementos to him and that he'd rather have kept. And that indicates that even then,
matching numbers.
The increased stress and the drinking, he had an appreciation of the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Were you aware that he was laying in substantial quantities of muriatic acid at or about this time?
Yes. Well, he made repeated purchases.
Damn right, Kelly. 6'5" energy. That's what I want to hear right now. See, that's how he projects. That's how good of an actor he truly is. Projects that 6'5" energy.
In terms of just the word lockable, when he told you he had a lockable metal cabinet, what does this, just simply the word lockable indicate?
That he could lock it.
Pardon?
That he could lock it so that others wouldn't pry and see what was in there.
And conceal wrongdoing.
Yes.
Appreciate. The debate then was underway whether, did he anticipate being forced out because he had lost his job, forced out of the apartment building?
Because he couldn't pay the rent.
And then he was debating whether he was going to totally destroy, acidify the skulls and whatever else he had, all the evidence, at least the physical remains that he still possessed.
That's what he said.
And you drew inferences on his appreciation of the wrongfulness, because where would he be able to conceal this? If it came to light, there would be problems for him. Would that be accurate?
Yes, well, and I understand the conflict. This was a decision he had to face as to whether to destroy some of his favorite items and keepsakes, or take a very big risk of being detected for all of these serious crimes.
And he was weighing that and fully appreciative of what appeared to be the risk involved.
Yes.
And it was on those observations and your earlier observations and those findings, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty as to whether at the time the defendant slayed...
Wow. I would nudge him off the bed gently because he seems sensitive. Wow.
Bradehoft, he had the substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Yes.
And what was that opinion?
In my opinion, at the time of killing Joseph Bradehoft, Mr. Dahmer possessed substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Would you share with the jury your findings as to whether Jeffrey Dahmer possessed or lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time of the slaying?
Check the poll. We're a couple of minutes into the poll. Out of 32 votes, okay, if you haven't hit the poll yet, hit the poll. I mean, the poll speaks for itself, okay? It's very simple, okay? We're not doing this middle ground shit. You either love him or you hate him. And the love is 88% and the hate is 12%. That seems about right, okay? I don't know why hate is so high. I don't know why the vote is so high for hate. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's still, at least it's overwhelmingly love.
Of Joseph Bradehoft.
Well, Mr. Dahmer described the events by saying, that was about a week after I'd lost the job. Drinking every day, was drinking in the afternoon, was on my way to the Grand Mall, saw him waiting at the bus stop, got off the bus, offered him money to go back to the apartment. Same scenario. He agreed. We did some drinking there of beer. Then I gave him the the sleeping potion, and he fell asleep. We had light sex before that and strangulation. I didn't take any pictures. I didn't have any film at the time, and so I just left him lying there on the bed, covered him over with a sheet.
Terrible actor shit. He's a good actor. He's a great actor.
And left him there for 2 days.
I'm getting triggered.
That
Use the
sequence of
bathroom.
events
I'll be right back.
that, as in the other cases, Mr.
Dan
Dahmer
comes in,
had
calls
brought
complete
the victim
chaos.
back to where he had him privately. It indicates that he was not behaving impulsively in the killing, but rather only after bringing the victim into this private setting where he could do so in the absence of witnesses. It indicates that he made the advanced preparation of rendering his victim unconscious with the drugging before engaging in the strangulation, which also shows that it's not an impulsive act. Mr. Dahmer has made plain in his other statements and in his behavior generally that he doesn't experience a compulsion to kill. But in this instance, just as in the case of Mr. Lacy, the fact that Mr. Dahmer is drinking heavily each day, as he reports, means that he may not have, in fact, consumed alcohol specifically to decrease his inhibitions against killing. He may already have consumed enough alcohol to decrease those inhibitions without drinking extra to achieve the goal. And so that piece of evidence does not appear to be present here as it is with the others. And then, of course, Mr. Dahmer made the more general statement that at the time of each of these 15 killings, had the victim agreed voluntarily to stay with him, he would have refrained. Had a witness entered, he would have refrained.
As a result of your observations, and particularly your findings with respect to this count, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether the defendant possessed substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time that he killed Joseph Bradehoft?
As in the case of Mr. Lacy, I think the most accurate way I can phrase this is that it's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that there is no mental disease that caused Mr. Dahmer at the time of killing Joseph Bradehoft to lack substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. But I cannot, from the facts that I've given so far, rule out the possibility that alcohol intoxication may have impaired his capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
And that would be, again, a matter for the court to instruct on the issue of intoxication. That completed your review with respect to the 15 particular individual slayings that were the counts in the information. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There's additional information you're going to share with the jury, but I'd like to go back a bit. This might be an...
Did you guys calm down in here, huh? I had to take a minute. I had to take a second. I had to take just a personal moment there. No, it wasn't even that, Shelley, unfortunately. No, I had to take a moment to regroup. Good Lord. Everyone done lost their damn minds. Keanu Reeves. Yeah, it is. I took a second. Keanu Reeves is a beautiful man, a beautiful person, and a great fucking actor. Okay? I'm not going to have the Keanu Reeves hate. Where are we at on this poll? 36 votes. A few more. It went up a little bit. 89 to 11 now. Good job.
Natural time to break, I'm not sure, because we're going to...
Well, if you want to at this time, we could do that.
Fine. Then I would suggest that we break.
Okay. Before we do break,
I need to.
one thing
I need to take a second here.
I'd like to address.
We're about to go into a stinger.
We have a birthday child. This birthday child has reached the age of 65 years. Now, that's not quite as old, or I should say that's a little older than the court, because, sir, you got me beat by 5 years and 5 days. I hit 60 on Monday. But, as serious as this trial is, as important it is, life does go on, and that includes birthdays. And I am sure that this birthday child would, as much as he may enjoy the companionship of his fellow jurors and bailiffs, would really prefer to be with some of his family members on his 65th birthday. But unfortunately, that's not possible. It's a poor substitute, sir. But on behalf of myself, on behalf of the court staff, and all of the participants in this trial, a very happy birthday, sir. And we look forward to seeing you all back here bright and smiling at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
I know that you just heard the worst shit that you've ever heard in your entire life, but, happy birthday. I'm glad you're on this planet for one more day, unlike all these other folks. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go into a stinger. And we're going to keep rolling. Rocking and rolling on Murder Church. Seriously, thanks everyone for coming through here. Appreciate it. Again, before we go into this stinger, share this out to your people. Let people know what you're doing. You're hanging out here on Murder Church with Publicly Buzzed Live. After this, you're going to be portaled into a Joe Jackalone live stream today at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You're going to want to check that out as well. Hopefully you're following my boy Jay. Hopefully you're following The Shaming of Jay. He's got a great interview coming up tomorrow. And then make sure you're following Defense Diaries also on YouTubes and everywhere, quite frankly. Thank you, fine folks, for chilling and willing and dealing. And we're back. Gonna keep her going, baby. Keep her going. Is it working? Is Stream Elements stopped working on me again here? Good God. I don't know what's going on with that thing. Joe needs to come back. Apparently the Joe one was the only one working. Happy birthday to someone in this court. We aren't sure who it is, but the judge sure. He seems to know.
Session. Honorable Lawrence C. Graham, Jr. presiding. Silence is commanded. You may be seated.
Jay, Buzz Nation, gonna kick your fucking face in.
Yesterday at the afternoon recess, I tried to give my deputies a very fast course, both in singing and in German, and I understand it didn't come out so good, so it's obviously the responsibility of the teacher. Ready to proceed, Mr. McCann?
That's right.
Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
When you interviewed the defendant in January, was there a discussion between you and him about...
And that's the bottom line. 'Cause Stone Cold Steve said so.
about his childhood?
Yes, there was.
And you spent several hours discussing that. You had already received substantial information, is that correct?
Yes, I spent the better part of the first day on his...
I'm not sure if his microphone is connected. Seems to me...
No, the system's not on. Is it?
Fix this man's microphone.
Yeah.
There we go.
I spent the
Hot
better part
mic,
of the
loud
first
mic.
day discussing with Mr. Dahmer his development from birth until the time of the first killing, I believe.
And you had received, to assist you in that consideration, numerous documents from the Milwaukee Police Department, the Bath, Ohio Police Department, school records, and various other materials. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yes,
he's
including
happy
materials.
as hell at all times. Some seemingly inappropriate times.
Based on interviews with his family and people who knew him during those years.
The jury has heard much of that. I'm just going to address two particular points. Did any of that evidence that the defendant had been subjected to sexual abuse within his home in any fashion?
No, consistently, everyone has said that that did not occur.
And was there any evidence that the defendant was subjected
Morning,
to
Ninja.
physical
What's up,
abuse
brother?
within his home?
Again, there's no evidence of that, and everyone has consistently said that did not occur.
Did you also discuss the death of Stephen Hicks with him?
Yes.
This is the death that occurred when he was in June of 1978, shortly after the defendant graduated from high school. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you spend substantial time discussing that death?
Yes.
And I won't go into detail with that, but did you keep that in mind, both the childhood background and the Stephen Hicks death, in the assessment you made of the defendant?
Yes, I did.
After that slaying of Mr. Hicks, the defendant spent the rest of the summer apparently in Bath, Ohio, and then entered the Ohio State University and spent the first semester at that university. Did you examine material relating to that and discuss that with him?
I did. I'm not sure if it was a semester or a quarter.
At the Ohio State University.
Right.
During that time, one would assume that he was exposed to numerous young men that he would find attractive. That is a large Midwestern land-grant college. Are you aware of that?
I am.
Ohio State. All right. Did you have any comment or any reflections on the fact that there appeared to be no sexual assaults, matters of that sort conducted by the defendant during that period?
He told me...
Any comments on that?
Well, he told me that after the Hicks killing, he was quite concerned about what he had done and wished to get rid of that memory which had upset him, and that he was eager to avoid that kind of activity. I think the fact that he did avoid it for what then became a prolonged period is an indication of his capacity to control his conduct and conform his conduct to the requirements of the law, even though he continued to have the same paraphilic interests during that entire period.
The record reflects that he entered the military in December of 1978, went into training in the southern part of the United States, became a medic, was transferred to Germany, the Baumholder area. Did there come a time that you discussed that portion of his life with him?
Yes.
And would you share with the jury the particular points you would think would be of interest on the subject issues?
Well, I think the most salient fact is that Mr. Dahmer indicated that he did not, in fact, commit any sexual offenses or kill anyone during the time that he was in the Army. And what he told me was that he had satisfied himself during that period with masturbation and the use of pornography. And he told the police that, too, that he had no homosexual relationships with men during that time. He committed no paraphilic acts during that time, and that he was able to satisfy himself with masturbation. He would from time to time buy gay pornography and make use of that in masturbation.
But exercised control in terms of there being no sexual assaults, anything of that sort.
That's right. Despite the paraphilia continuing, he was able to not only not act on it, but actually indicated that he didn't fantasize about it too much during that time.
He was mustered out then in March of 1981 and went to Miami, Florida for a period of approximately 6 months, occasionally lived on the beach. Did you discuss that period of his life with him?
Yes, I did.
And did you in particular discuss his sexual activities or absence of activities or what was transpiring in that realm of his life?
I did.
And would you share what conclusions you drew or what was said with the jury?
Well, once again, there was this period during which Mr. Dahmer did not engage in any paraphilic activities or commit any offenses related to any paraphilia. He said that basically during that time he was too busy with work to become involved in any relationships.
He then moved to Ohio and apparently in the latter part of 1981 and either late 81 or early 1982 moved to his grandmother's residence in West Allis, Wisconsin. And sometime thereafter secured a job with a plasma corporation on the west side of our city. Did you discuss that period of his life with him?
Yes, I did.
Is there anything you'd like to share with the jury on that?
Well, the one salient fact from that period, and I should point out there's some difficulty in ascertaining exactly the dates or years of events during that early period he was in West Allis, but apparently before a time when he began to focus his attention on religion, there was an occasion while working at the Plasma Center that he did do something unusual. I had, of course, been aware that he'd been working at the Plasma Center and was on a daily basis drawing blood from individuals who were donating blood to be used for concentrating material for blood bank. And I asked him if he had any particular interest in blood, thinking that perhaps that's what had led him to seek out that job. And he said that he remembered one time when he did take a vial of blood home, a test tube, and that he tried tasting blood once. It was the blood of a Native American man, and I asked him, did you drink it straight? He said, right. It didn't taste good. Yuck, yuck, that's the way it was. But I kept it long enough until it solidified. I don't know why I kept it, what I was planning on doing with it. I ended up throwing it away, so I had some strange ideas even then. I asked, it was fresh when you drank it? And he said it was. I said, where were you when you did this? And he said that he'd gone to the roof of the blood center during the lunch break and that he'd taken home what was left over from that particular test tube of blood. I asked whether he drank any at home, and he said he did not. I asked whether that was because he had tried it once, and he said that's why. I asked him how he made sure that he didn't walk back down to the plasma center with blood dripping on his chin, and he said that he just spit it out on the rooftop. He had just wanted to see what it tasted like, that he didn't know why he wanted to see what it tasted like, but had the idea and carried it out. I then asked if there was anything in that for him, and he said, just the strange excitement in seeing what it tasted like, but I don't even know why I wanted to do it, just for the experience, I guess. I asked, but this isn't a sexual excitement you're describing? And he said, it wasn't then, no. That's the only...
I want the drink your blood. Happy Halloween, Miss Deanna. Inappropriate.
Unusual conduct that I'm aware of during that particular period.
And then did there come a time approximately, I say approximately, 1983 and 1984, that he indicated that he came under the grandmother's influence in terms of her religious commitments and started to attend church and directly addressed certain activities within his life?
Yes.
And would you share that with the jury, what he told you about that?
Well, he said that there was a period of approximately 2 years.
Yeah, Stan, if you're still here, dude, bring those banana chips on over. I may have to go to your house to get them. He's probably already had to leave.
When he tried to commit himself to religion, to going to church, and to reading the Bible, and that during that period, when he was trying to avoid alcohol and avoid indulging his sexual urges, he was largely successful at doing that. That from time to time he would feel the need to have some sexual release, and he would handle it during that period. He told either the police or me, I'm not sure now who, that he would try to stimulate himself by rubbing against the bed or some other object of that sort, so that he wouldn't be touching himself, and that it wouldn't exactly be masturbation, but so that he'd be able to gain some sexual relief. But by and large, that he managed during that time to suppress not just sexual activity.
If we could figure it out, like, man, do I have to shave? Nah, it'd probably be funnier with the beard, right? With beards. What do we got to do that to make that happen? Get some wigs, some dresses. They're wearing dresses. I'm about to look the picture up right now. Hold on.
But even sexual thoughts and desires most of the time, and was able to refrain from drinking.
And then he report a particular incident involved at the West Dallas Library?
Yes.
At this point, would you share that with the jury?
Well, Mr. Dahmer's reported to everyone who's asked him about this period an incident in which he was reading in the library and someone dropped a note in his lap propositioning him for sex in the men's room, and that he saw that as a turning point for him. Although he didn't accept the proposition.
Next time on Lost.
That was when he decided to abandon this quest for spiritual guidance and the reliance on religion. And that thereafter, he made two changes. The first was that he told me that it seemed that religion wasn't working, and so he temporarily flirted with another possibility, namely whether there was a spiritual system involving satanic beliefs that might be attractive. He looked into that and rejected the metaphysics of it. Didn't find the philosophy very appealing, except for the emphasis on self-indulgence, which he did like. And so basically rejected the ideas that went along with that view. But then he decided to explore the gay underground and discovered it through adult bookstores, through the bathhouses, and through gay bars. And so he began to engage in sexual relations with a variety of men.
From that period then, 1978, as far as you could determine from the slaying of Mr. Hicks in approximately June of 1978, until he started to explore the gay underground, as you've described it, during that period of 7 years or so, he apparently maintained control and did not even involve himself in homosexual activities with other people. Would that be accurate?
Yes, it is.
After this library incident, he became involved in the porn shops, the gay bars, and the bathhouses. Did there come a time that he expressed dissatisfaction with the activities at the bathhouse that caused him to adopt the drugging procedure?
Yes.
Would you briefly share that with the jury?
Mr. Dahmer had, at that time, been...
Son of a... Hold on. I don't even need to say it. Oh, wait. That was not it.
Son of a bitch!
Able to be with partners in bathhouses where behind closed doors for a modest fee, he'd be able to have a room with a bed in it for as long as desired. But he said that it wasn't ideal for him because the men that he was with often desired a greater variety of sexual activities than he did. As I believe I mentioned yesterday, his principal desires were to lie with someone and masturbate and gently fondle and touch and rub and such things. But many of the other men wanted to engage in what Mr. Dahmer described as something other than soft sex. They wanted to have anal intercourse with him, and they would have some set period of time they were willing to devote to the contact. He wanted to stay with them longer, and he didn't want to do some of what they wanted to do. And it's because of those concerns that he began to drug the men in the bathhouses so that they would not be making these demands on him, and they wouldn't be leaving either. He'd have hours with them.
And did he indicate at that time that's when he gave birth to the idea of securing the particular drug from a physician saying that he was working the third shift and needed that for sleeping purposes?
Well, he did indicate that that's how he was able to receive the drug, and that he pretended that he was the one taking it to get it, but I'm not sure when he started getting it.
There came a time then when he shifted his operations from the bathhouse to local hotels, is that correct?
Yes, it is. That happened when Mr. Dahmer was thrown out of the only bathhouse available to him in Milwaukee. I think it was the Club Bath at 57th in Wisconsin. And the people who worked there remembered a number of complaints from clients about Mr. Dahmer drugging people. And one particular incident when an ambulance had to be called because he'd given enough to one man that he couldn't be aroused, and so they'd had to call the paramedics. And Mr. Dahmer recalled the same incident, though he wasn't aware how much they suspected that he was doing there. After that, after they told him he couldn't come back, and without another bathhouse available to him in Milwaukee, he began to take men to hotels, and there were 3 particular hotels that he used for that purpose, and he indicated to me that he took men to hotels for sexual purposes and to drug them and have sex with them on as many as 10 occasions.
And did there come a time at or about this time after he had started into the hotels that he spoke about seeing a video named Faces of Death?
Yes.
Oh my God. I think it was, man, was it the Leprechaun? I call it the Leprechaun episode, but it was like the St. Patrick's Day episode we did. I had Leprechaun on the thumbnail, but I think that episode we were watching all kinds of trailers on that one. That one was obviously demonetized, and I actually left it. I didn't try to fix it. It's a really fun one. It's cool as hell. It's early PB too. I think before we met Jay even. But but on that one we watch a Faces of Death trailer. And I don't know if any of you guys, I'm sure you did, growing up, going to movie stores, the video store, renting Faces of Death. I think the first one came out in 78, if I'm not mistaken. There's tons of different actual Faces of Death, and there's tons of spin-offs of Faces of Death. There's like Traces of Death, and tons of little spin-offs, just little plays on the names. But that first one, I mean, there's tons of fake stuff in it, but there's also lots of real actual death in it. Man, it will fuck you up, like... Honestly, I would not recommend it. I rented that, and I know I've told the stream on here, and I apologize for anybody that know I've told the stream on here. I've told this story on the stream before, and if anybody's heard this, I apologize. But when I was growing up, I was lucky enough to be able to rent anything I wanted from the movie store because I was a horror fan, you know, and I didn't have any restrictions on the R movies that I did watch. You know, I'm not talking like weird movie like the X section, but R movies from the horror section was limitless. So I rent Faces of Death. Okay, bring it back. And I didn't even finish it the first time I ever tried to watch it. You know, because when you get older and you're like in your later teens, early 20s, it's almost like, can I watch it? It's almost like, at least for me and my friends, you know, we were like trying to test ourselves. Can we get through this or whatever? But when I first rented that, I was young. Like, I'm talking 10. And I was like, this is different. This doesn't have the same vibe as these other horror movies that I've been renting. It was for a reason. It's fucked up.
With the jury, the discussion you had with them on that?
He told me that sometime after having killed Mr. Hicks and before killing Stephen Tomey, there was an occasion when he discovered some videos, commercially prepared videos that are marketed under the title Faces of Death. I was familiar with these because it was a fad a few years ago for teenagers to rent these, and they are a compilation of...
Would it be cool if I could go live to Dan right now, just like commentating, walking around Walmart, just grunting, oh, fuck.
Particularly...
Hey, Annabelle, if you're listening, what's up?
Gruesome and explicit.
Need them banana chips. Them nanner chips.
Real footage of various events around the world. And Mr. Dahmer asked me if I was familiar with those, and said that he hadn't told anyone else about this, but that he had watched those videos a couple of times before meeting Stephen Tomey, and had rented them from ordinary video supply places. His description was, quote, "They're pretty gruesome, very realistic. They show people in various stages of death, and they showed an autopsy on one young guy. They cut the skull, remove the brain, cut open the chest area."
Oh, they're just going to explain it. Okay.
"And remove the organs, sewed them back up."
All right, hold on. So the poll that we have right now, I'm going to go ahead and crush this one. 42 votes. Keanu Reeves overwhelmingly with the win. 86% to 14% love to hate. Ending that poll, and I'm going to make a new poll.
Up. Then they showed executions of World War II and things like that. Very graphic. I asked him how many times he'd watched, and he said just once, and that he'd rented them only once. I asked if he did any rewinding while he was watching, and he said, "Yeah, I watched that autopsy of that young guy a couple of times." And I asked whether he masturbated during those videos, and he said, quote, "During that scene, I think I did get off," end quote. I asked if he thought that the film Faces, I asked whether he thought the film Faces of Death had any effect on him, and he said no, because the thoughts were already in my head, so it didn't give me any new ideas. I asked if it had reawakened any interest, and he said, yeah, it did, that autopsy scene especially, because he was good looking. He was totally naked. I don't know why I happen to have a fascination with that.
Did you discuss with him the Tuomi incident that occurred in November of 1987 at the Ambassador Hotel?
Yes.
And did you spend some time discussing that?
Yes, we discussed it in detail.
Did you, and we won't go over that, but thereafter, did he tell you that he made what his reflections were after the Tuomi incident?
Yes, he did.
Would you share those with the jury?
Well, he told me that the experience led him to make two changes. The first was, having realized how difficult it was to move a corpse from a hotel room, he decided not to return to hotels anymore, and from that point began to take men back to his grandmother's house, where he would have greater privacy and more space to work. The other thing he told me was that
everybody that can do it. Jay's face in the chat. Jay's face in the chat. Everybody. Jay's face in the chat. Jay and Dan's face. Everybody. We got Dan out here at Walmart. We got Jay doing a little work. Boom. Everybody. Jay and Dan faces in the chat. Let's go.
this changed his efforts to control himself. In his words, quote, "After that incident, it seemed like there was no point in trying to resist the urges and the compulsion to do that. So that's when I started going out, looking around at the bars for other people." I asked, "What do you mean there was no point?" And he said, "Just since it had happened again, much to my surprise, it just, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It just felt like there was no point in trying to resist doing that sort of activity." I asked whether he meant that there was no difference between killing a few and killing a lot. And he said, "No, it just seemed by that time the driving compulsion to be with someone and control them was so strong and so prevalent throughout all my waking hours that I just continued doing that. It seemed like that broke any thought of holding back and not doing that sort of thing again."
Again, what is the term driving compulsion? Would you comment on that? What he was experiencing, what the paraphilia, what that experiencing was?
Well, the subjective experience of one with a paraphilia, and Mr. Dahmer's accounts to me of what he felt, is that of a sex urge.
So in other words,
drive.
he's talking about a sexual urge.
Right, a sex urge.
Now, from that time forward, other than his discussion about inhibitions when it came to slaying people, did he ever indicate to you in any way that he attempted to reset his will against doing these things?
Not at all.
Pardon?
No.
All right. Did he ever indicate that he tried to, again, to resist these ideas or to change what he was doing?
He gave no indication of ever trying to resist from that point.
There followed thereafter the slaying of Mr. Dockstader in, the slaying of the death of Tuomi was in November of 1987. There followed thereafter the slaying of James Dockstader in January 17, 1988, and the slaying of Richard Guerrero on March 27, 1988. You already have testified with respect to those.
Yes.
Did you also discuss with him his encounter with Ronald Flowers on or about April 3rd of 1988?
Yes.
Would you share with the jury your reflections on that?
Mr. Dahmer told me that he met Mr. Flowers in front of the gay bars downtown and offered him money to return with him.
Now, this is the incident where the man's car wasn't operating. He had difficulty with his car.
That's right.
Right.
Well, yes, that is the same incident. He did take the man back, and as Mr. Dahmer described it to me, he drugged the man in the basement, and in the morning, the man woke up after Mr. Dahmer had had light sex with him. Mr. Dahmer then took $80 from him, walked him to the bus stop, saw him get on the bus, and said, quote, he was really out of it, drugged, and apparently woke up in some hospital, and that was it, end quote. I asked him if he thought he was going to get caught for that, and he said, no, because I hadn't hurt him in any way. And I said, well, you drugged him and took money, right? And he said, yeah, I figured they would just think that he just lost the money and that he'd been drinking. And I asked, so that was no big risk to you? And he said, no. I asked if his grandmother had seen him with the man, and he said, yes. I said, what was her response? And he said, negative. That's one of the reasons shortly after that, I moved out to the 24th Street apartment. He had also told the police that when his grandmother saw him with this individual in the basement, he decided not to kill this victim. That such a decision not to kill someone because a witness had seen you with them would be an indication of...
Oh, shit. Lakota, what are they doing? What are they doing? $1.99.
Give me the loot! Give me the loot!
I'm a bad man. Lakota, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Appreciate the hell out of it.
Of his capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law, and is consistent with what Mr. Dahmer told me about every one of the charged killings, namely that if his grandmother had walked in, he would not have committed the killing.
Good question, Joanne. Yeah, the lady to his right is always just writing something. Is she like taking just notes about everything in general?
On another occasion, Mr. Dahmer told the police that in the morning his grandmother saw Mr. Flowers there, at which time Mr. Dahmer figured that Flowers was too big and he didn't want to cause a commotion, and his grandmother had seen him, so he did not kill him, which again is an indication of the capacity to conform his conduct when it suits him to do so. There was also a discrepancy between some marks on Mr. Flowers' neck that Mr. Flowers described and Mr. Dahmer's recollection, in that Mr. Flowers said that there was a circular mark about his neck, and Mr. Dahmer said that he hadn't done anything to the man's neck. And lastly, from that incident, there was an occasion when Mr. Flowers again was in Milwaukee and encountered Mr. Dahmer at a bar and confronted him. And Mr. Flowers pointed out that he remembered who Mr. Dahmer was. And Mr. Flowers got angry and was accusatory toward Mr. Dahmer. And as soon as this happened, Mr. Dahmer backed off and left the club and got in a taxi and went away, so that he avoided a confrontation with a fully alert adult male, which I think is informative as to why he drugs individuals before he kills them. That is, there are multiple reasons he does it. One of them, at least in some instances, is to avoid a physical fight or a confrontation. And specifically with respect to the killings of Raymond Smith and David Thomas,
Let me look real quick, guys.
Mr. Dahmer acknowledged to me that that was one of the reasons that he killed them, because he didn't want to have a fight with them in the morning.
Thereafter, he secured, I'm sorry, did you complete your comments on Flowers?
Yes.
Thereafter, he secured an apartment near North 24th and West Wells Street, and there ensued on September 26, 1988, involvement with a juvenile that we have referred to as SS. Did you discuss that incident with Mr. Dahmer?
Yes.
Would you share your reflections on that with the jury?
Well, he told me that he approached SS because he liked his physique.
Everyone, shh, that didn't happen. That did not happen.
And that he brought him back to, under the pretext of taking pictures of him, and in fact did take pictures of him, that he drugged the young man, after which the young man fell asleep. I'm sorry, need to correct that. The young man didn't fall asleep. He said that he did administer the drug, and that after the young man had gone home, he apparently had fallen asleep and his parents had called the police. I don't think that's exactly what had happened, because I've read the police reports of what everyone else had to say, but it is the case that after the young man left, he was discovered to be in an unusual condition of intoxication and brought to the hospital from where the police were called. But most importantly, Mr. Dahmer told me that he had no intention of doing SS any harm. And I asked, why is that? And he said, I had to be at work that night. And I said, which meant there wasn't time to really make it worthwhile? And he said, right. Now, I think that is an indication of his capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law, in that this was a young man whose physique fit the desired profile for Mr. Dahmer. He had available to him the only apparatus he needed to carry out his usual plan, namely drugs and the privacy of his apartment, and yet he refrained from killing him simply because Mr. Dahmer had to go to work that night and wouldn't have had the time to enjoy the victim's body. So that informs us as to how strong the sexual urge is. It informs us as to how readily Mr. Dahmer is able to obey the law when he chooses to do so. He said that when he was subsequently arrested for that, he was shocked by the police coming out to work and arresting him, and that he spent 6 days in jail before making bond, and then went back to his apartment and immediately destroyed the skull that he had there and moved out of the apartment because he was concerned about the incriminating evidence being discovered. And he said at that time that was the only incriminating evidence that was present, and he destroyed it, which is further indication of his awareness of the wrongfulness of saving skulls.
Thereafter, the homicide of Anthony Sears occurred on March 25, 1989. The defendant was sentenced on May 23, 1989 to a work release period. Then in May 20, 1990, the homicide of Raymond Smith occurred, and on June 24, 1990, the homicide of Edward Smith. You've already spoken to those homicides. And on July 8, 1990, there was an encounter with a juvenile that we've referred to as LP. Did you discuss that encounter with the defendant?
Yes, I did.
Would you share with the jury his comments and your reflections on that incident?
On this occasion, Mr. Dahmer said that he had run out of the drugs that he'd used on other victims, and was short on money. He had already met LP and arranged a date with him. There'd been a confusion about whether it was 12 noon or 12 midnight they'd meet, but he was expecting to get together with him. And in anticipation of getting together with him, he went to an Army surplus store where he bought a rubber mallet, and then went to the bars at midnight for his second effort to have the date with the young man, and did encounter him, take him home, and while at home, told him that he wanted to take pictures of him and had him lie down on the bed. And once he was face down on the bed, that is, LP was, Mr. Dahmer said that he struck him in the back of his neck with the mallet, hoping to knock him out. And that didn't work. Got up, was very upset, got dressed, left the apartment, said he was going to call the police. About 15 minutes later, he comes back, knocks on the outer door of the apartment building. I let him in. He says he needs money to get a cab, and I didn't want him to leave again, so I grabbed his neck. We struggled in the living room area for about 10 minutes. We were both tired out. I wanted to calm the situation down. We walked into the bedroom. I was talking with him all night, trying to calm him down and make it so he wouldn't call the police. He agreed. About 7 in the morning, we both walked up to the 21st Street corner on Wisconsin Avenue. I called him a cab and he left. And it turns out he did tell the police, but he gave them a wild story that I had knocked him out somewhere on the road and carried him back, so they didn't believe him. In the course of our discussion of this case, I asked, after calming him down, you even got him to agree to let you tie his hands behind his back? And he said he had. And I said, for half an hour, over the next half hour, according to the account the victim gave, he wiggled free, and then you grabbed a knife, and he confirmed that that had happened. I asked why he had restrained him, and he said, just so he wouldn't be able to run out on me before I calmed things down. I asked why he'd used the knife, and he said, just to keep him from jumping up and leaving, and acknowledged that he'd used the knife to intimidate him. He said that was the same knife that he'd used on the other victims. I asked if there was a time at which he intended to kill him, and he said, yeah, right, when I struck him. And I asked whether that had changed, his intent to kill. And he said, after the struggle. And I said, how did that change that? And he said, too tired, I don't know. This is out of character for me. I just wanted to talk him down, and I just wasn't drunk anymore, just didn't have it in me to do it. Now, that last statement, excuse me, as to why he changed his mind about killing this victim is consistent with the other statements that Mr. Dahmer made to me and the other evidence that I've reviewed, namely that when he forms the intent to kill, he requires the effects of alcohol to decrease his inhibitions against killing. And in this instance, among the reasons that he then refrained from killing are, first, the effects of the alcohol were wearing off, as he told me, and secondly, that he was tired and didn't feel he had the energy to do it. I believe that that is evidence of the strength of the sexual urge that he was experiencing and shows us that his sexual urge, like that of many individuals, is one that is not so strong that when he's too tired, he'd prefer not to engage in the sexual activity. And it confirms, of course, that without the effects of the alcohol, he finds the killing too aversive to engage in.
He's got to dull himself with the alcohol, getting so drunk that he's not even really kind of there. Look at him right there in that picture. But yeah, you're just kind of like on autopilot. If he gets drunk enough, oh, this is tolerable, right? You know, think about alcoholics in life that end up, you know, becoming homeless or whatever. It's because they can't function through regular life because you got to be at work not drunk. Like, they need to be drinking even to just function at a moderate level. I bet when Jeffrey Dahmer went to prison or even got busted, man, I mean, because if he was like an absolute alcoholic, which it sounds like he was, you know, that's dangerous to just go completely cold turkey with an alcoholic like that. So I wonder if like maybe he had like a detox type of situation where he got weaned off of the alcohol out the gate. Was that even a thing in the early 90s, you know, where they just let him kind of suffer with that? Or does it even matter, right? I don't know. I guess that's a discussion as well. But yeah, that would have been crazy because it sounds like this man needed alcohol at all times to even get through his day. And then he couldn't even keep a job as well.
I asked if he started looking.
And he was happy when he got caught, man. Like, he was like, finally, like, this is over. But probably not thinking about the drink at that time because he was probably drunk at that time, right? And then he sobers up and he's like, fuck.
Over his shoulder afterward. And he said for a few days, perhaps a week afterwards, he had, indicating that he was aware of the wrongfulness and that the police might be interested in this event. And then I asked, it sounds like there are multiple reasons then that you changed your mind about killing. He answered, he was wide awake, I got to know him better, and I just didn't have what it took to hurt him. I asked, did it make any difference when he talked about his family? And he said, yeah, I suppose it did. I got to know him, just couldn't do it. The reason I asked that is that some research on hostage takers indicates that they are less likely to kill victims if the victims develop some relationship with them and they begin to see them as real people. And here I thought that perhaps this captive young man had been seen in the same way, that is, he'd come to be seen more as a whole person than as a sex object, and that might have played a part in inhibiting Mr. Dahmer from killing him, and he acknowledged as that was so. And I think that, once again, the reasons he gives for changing his mind about killing him are an indication of the fact that this is not a compulsion to kill, and that the sexual urges were not so strong that they couldn't be resisted under these circumstances. Said he had bought the hammer on that occasion because it was cheaper than having his prescription filled.
Doctor, I'm going to ask a broader question. Was there any other evidence bearing on Mr. Dahmer's responsibility at the time of the charged killings that you have not yet discussed?
Yes, there is.
And would you share those matters with the jury? An investigative report from the Bath Police Department quoted Mr. Dahmer as stating that the reason for his murders was, quote, my own warped, selfish desire for self-gratification. And the police quoted him as saying that particular thing on 2 occasions, that he had committed the murders because of his own selfish desire for self-gratification. That I interpret as a statement of his capacity to conform his conduct, in that he committed the murders in order to gratify his sexual urges, and felt that gratifying his sexual urges was more important than the alternative, which would have been to let these men live. Second point that I hadn't mentioned earlier was a comment that Mr. Dahmer made to the police about the events that transpired while he was living at his grandmother's house. Apparently, his aunt, I don't know if it's Eunice or Eunice, but I think his Aunt Eunice had complained about the foul smell emanating from the basement at the grandmother's house, and Mr. Dahmer on that occasion had made excuses for what the odor was, first saying that the cat Jody had fouled the kitty litter box, and then when that explanation didn't sell too well,
He gave a different explanation, making up a story that he'd found a dead raccoon and cut up the raccoon in the basement to save the bones. And he said that he'd made up those stories because he realized it was the odor of dismembered bodies coming from the basement. And the making of cover stories is a reflection of his awareness of the wrongfulness of his actions, and that he needed to conceal what in fact he was doing. Mr. Dahmer also told me that the odor of dismemberment had always been a turnoff. And we had a series of, I'm sorry, if I could start that sentence again. I'm sorry to be fumbling with my notes too here. Here's what I was looking for. There was a particular conversation that I had with Mr. Dahmer in which I asked him questions about his responsibility in general, and I'd like to quote what he said in that discussion. The exact questions and answers were, for every one of the victims that you're charged with killing, did you appreciate that it was wrong at the time you killed them? His answer was, yes. I asked, and if your grandmother or another witness had walked in just before you killed him, would you have killed him? Answer, no, I would not. Question, you would have stopped? Answer, uh-huh. Question, if for every one of them, if they had agreed to stay with you, that you would not have killed them? Answer, yeah, right. Question, but yet there does seem to be a change toward the end. You've described to me a number of elements of that. Even when you were bringing them back more quickly, getting sloppy, things were going badly for you. Even then, you still knew it was wrong? Answer, yeah, I always had that sense that it was wrong. I don't think anybody can kill somebody and think that it's right. Question, even at your sloppiest, with all of these charged offenses, if somebody had walked in? Answer, no, I wouldn't have done that. Question, you wouldn't have done them if you didn't think you could get away with it? Answer, no. Although with LP, I probably could have done it, but we talked and I got to know him. For some reason, I was willing to take the risk that he wouldn't say anything. Question, right, he decided not to. Answer, yeah, didn't have any alcohol at that point either, so I wasn't in the right mindset. My inhibitions were quite high then. Question, did you find yourself drinking to try to drown your inhibitions? Answer, and it always worked. Question, did you know that if you didn't drink, you wouldn't be able to go through with it? Answer, I may have been able to go through with it, but it would have made it harder. Question, you might have been able to strangle them anyway? Answer, Question, how would it have been harder? Answer, I may not have had the sexual arousal to the degree I did when I was drinking. Maybe not, I don't know, maybe I would have. I was usually drinking when it happened. Question, the drinking you think was an aphrodisiac for you? Answer, it served that purpose, yeah. Question, it also made you feel less badly about the killing, is that correct? Answer, maybe, although I was so intent on fulfilling this desire I had, I don't know how badly I would have felt, even if I hadn't been drinking. I don't know. Those are all hypothetical questions. I don't know how to answer that. Question, okay, that's fair. Were there any instances with these men whom you did in fact kill, where you thought that you would not kill them when you went with them, and then changed your mind later? Answer, no, I usually was pretty thorough in finding someone that I was attracted to and wanted to keep. Question. Keep. But some other ones whom you didn't kill, you knew in advance you weren't going to. Answer, Question. You knew in advance you had a different plan with them? Answer, I just couldn't find anyone who was really my type, but I still wanted to be with someone, so I settled for second best. Question, but these others were keepers. Answer, right, right. Question, did you think of it that way, as keepers? Answer, you could use that term, yeah. Question, that wasn't a term you thought of? Answer, no, it fits the bill. In addition to that conversation that encompasses a great deal, there were many details discussed in the course of the 3 days of interviews, and many details that emerged from police reports that bear on the issue of Mr. Dahmer's responsibility. One is that Mr. Dahmer is quoted in a police report as saying that after hosing down the basement floor at his grandmother's house and washing all the blood down the drain after dismembering victims, he was careful that none of the body parts or chunks of flesh got into the drain, and that after disposing of the body parts and the bones and hosing down the blood, he'd pour a full gallon bottle of bleach down the drain in order to get rid of the smell. Those tasks are an indication of his appreciation of the wrongfulness of his conduct, that he's trying to carefully get rid of the evidence and the odor. Likewise, from a police report, Mr. Dahmer said that he bought the knife that he used to dismember victims at his grandmother's house and disposed of the knife the same way he did the body, namely throwing it into the trash. He also said that he threw away the clothing of victims from his grandmother's house. And the disposal of the clothing and the knife is an indication of his appreciation of the wrongfulness of his conduct. I asked Mr. Dahmer in my own examination of him, would you use a condom when you had intercourse with the corpses? Answer, yeah, I would. Question, and there you
thank God he used a condom while having sex with the corpses. This changes everything.
Had time to answer, mm-hmm. Question, were you faithful about doing that? Answer, right. His use of a condom before engaging in anal intercourse with the corpses in whom he had a necrophilic interest is an indication of the state of mind he was in at the time. It's an indication of the strength of his sexual urges. I think it's a common experience among males to have had occasions when the urge seemed to be too intense to delay to make use of a condom even when they wished to do that, and that Mr. Dahmer's use of a condom in these circumstances with corpses is an indication that the intensity of his sexual urge at that point was less than that many teenagers experience in the back seat with their girlfriend. There was another occasion when I was asking Mr. Dahmer about some of the particular ways in which he had disposed of the remains of victims, when I was curious about some instances in which he had peeled the skin off the soles of feet, which seemed an unusual thing to do. And I asked him why that had happened, and he said that he'd done that to provide more surface area for the acid to disintegrate the feet. He had discovered that the soles of the feet were tougher and took longer to acidify, and then did this so that it would not take as much time to dispose of the evidence. He also mentioned having used a saw to cut the femurs, which is the long bone of the leg, in half so it would fit inside the barrel. I had made a couple observations at the apartment building where Mr. Dahmer last lived before his arrest that I asked him about. One was a hypothesis I developed there about which it turned out I was wrong when I asked him. It seemed to me that the front of the building he lived in, the facade of it, was recognizably different from others in the area, and I wondered whether he might have taken victims in the back door so that in case someone were to escape or to leave, that it would be less easy for them to recognize the front of the building. This was just an idea I had when I visited there. I asked him about it, and he said that that wasn't so, that he had gone in the back door merely because it was closer to his apartment and didn't require taking the elevator all the way up. And then I asked him, you weren't concerned about anyone being able to recognize the front of the building again? And he said no. And I asked a leading question, which isn't the best technique, but I did in this instance, and said, because you figured they weren't leaving? And he said, right, right. Indicating that at the time he took victims in, he had already planned on killing them. I asked what position he was in with the victims when he strangled them, that is, those he strangled, and he said that they were on the bed, lying on their backs, that he always got them in bed before they passed out. I asked if he would get on top of them when strangling them, and he said no, that he was to the side of them, usually lying beside
what's
them
up?
and facing them. And he said that before using the strap for strangulation, he had, in all other instances of strangulation, used only his hands. I asked him about quantities of ether and chloroform that had been found at the apartment, and he said that he had begun using those chemicals with Mr. Lindsay, and that the way he had administered it was to put a dust mask that looks like a surgical mask on the victim after the victim was drugged, and was trying to use ether or chloroform to anesthetize the victims while they were already unconscious as a result of the effects of the drug, to facilitate the surgical procedure, the drilling into the skull, but that he didn't think that the ether or the chloroform had been very effective for this purpose. He had, that is, Mr. Dahmer had made mention to someone else, I think the police, that at the time he dismembered bodies, he would generally become naked. And so I asked him about that to see if that were sexual. And he said that it was not, that the purpose, I said, well, I asked, what was the purpose of that? And he said, because it was very messy, bloody, I didn't want to get it on my clothes. He said he'd begun to do that with the dismemberment of Cash D, that is Raymond Smith. I asked whether he'd become naked at his grandmother's house while dismembering, and he said no, that he just wore old clothes, that he was careful there, rolled up his sleeves, and had more room to work. I asked where he had done the dismembering, and he said that except in one instance, he had always done that in the bathroom. I asked about the other instance, which was the man whose skin he had removed while the man was in the bedroom on a plastic sheet. And he said that even in that instance, he had been cautious to remove the internal organs in the bathroom because he didn't want to have blood everywhere. I said the nudity while dismembering shouldn't be taken then as an indication of sexual excitement, and he said no, that it shouldn't. I asked, was there a ritual? And he said no. I asked, were you in a frenzy? And he said, I tried to do it as quickly as I could, yeah. I said, because, I guess I laughed, and he said, because of the smell factor. I said, so you were in a hurry? And he said, right. And he added, you mentioned in a frenzy. That's a good way of putting it, because a few times while I was in the middle of the process, there were knocks on the doors and stuff, odors and stuff, so that would really get me going. I would pretend not to be home sometimes, not answer the door. Other times I would. I said, you'd feel very anxious? And he said, putting it mildly. I said, what was the fear that you, and he interrupted and said, extreme anxiety. I asked what he feared, and he said that what I was doing would be discovered. So he endorsed the concept of a frenzy to mean that he was quickly hurrying through dismemberment because the odor was so repulsive and because he feared discovery and even heard knocks on the door sometimes while dismembering, all of which is an indication of his awareness of the wrongfulness of that conduct. I also asked him about something that appeared in a police report that indicated that he had masturbated while looking at body parts in jars of formaldehyde, and Mr. Dahmer said that that was not the case. That's not what had happened. And I asked him again whether that had ever happened, and he said no, it never happened that he masturbated while looking at a body part in formaldehyde. I asked him how he had felt when he would place remains of victims out in the dumpster or in the garbage, because there was a mention at one point in a report that he had felt some sense of loss when giving up the remains of a victim. But his response here was that he felt apprehensive, and he said there was a large, very large dumpster, metal dumpster, so I'd usually try to place it when it was about half full, so it would be covered over at the time, because there were a lot of bums that came around and looked for cans in the trash, so it gave me a worry. That's when I started using that acid technique. I asked him whether he'd ever disposed of whole, long bones in the trash, and he said, never, no. I said, because of what? He said, the possibility of discovery. I said, from limbs? He said, right. I said, or intact heads? He said, right. I asked, why do you think they would be more likely to be discovered? And he said, because they wouldn't decay. I asked if he worried about the bags ripping open, and he said, yeah, that's why I triple bagged them. I asked if he felt a sense of relief every time the trash truck drove away, and he said that he did. He also mentioned on another occasion that he was always careful to make sure that no one saw what was in the trash bags. He said that there were times when he decided not to go out and entice back another victim during the weekend because he was already busy disposing of the remains of a preceding victim. I asked whether he blocked out thoughts of who these people were or their families, and he said that he did. I asked him why, and he said because it made it easier to do the act and to depersonalize them. I asked if he had, in fact, wanted bondage pictures of Tracy Edwards, or whether that had been a pretext to get control, and he said that he'd say that sometimes to get the cuffs on them, and that it really wasn't that he wanted to get bondage pictures, but rather that he wanted to gain control of the men. I asked him, do you think you're responsible for what you did? And he said, well, I know I'm responsible because I was the one that caused everything to happen. I commented to him, I think you've been very forthright about that and haven't tried to shift the blame to anybody else or anything else. And he replied, no, the blame belongs on me. No one else had anything to do with it. He commented to me later, quote, it's a strange situation to be in. I mean, I was so intent on having a great deal of control and shaping my own destiny, and now it's all out of my hands, end quote. He also commented in the same tone, quote, you can't keep running from the truth forever. Eventually you have to face the consequences. It may take years, but eventually you do. And I'm just sick and tired of the lies, the hiding parts of my life. I'm tired of it, want to cleanse my conscience as much as I can. I asked him whether if he'd had a vehicle, he might have disposed of evidence.
Oh, hell yeah, Mandy. What's up? Gifting out a membership, and JM. Gonna get that bad boy. Welcome, JM, to being a member.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Hell yeah. Crack one open and give you a satisfying pour as well, sir. Thank you, thank you. Beers in the chat if you can. Thank you very much. Welcome again. You are now in. Now when I get new members, I say this. Now you are in for Tuesday. Every 2 Tuesdays. Not this one, the next one. You're going to get a live stream of me sitting here talking about a killer or an event, something that is not often talked about in true crime. So you're in, baby. Thank you, Mandy. Appreciate that. Hell yeah.
Otherwise, rather than dismembering. And he said that he thought he would have dismembered them anyway, and said that he would have done so partly because he would have wanted to save something from the victims for himself. I said, but you could have saved a lot of work by taking the bodies elsewhere and disposing of them. He said, that's true, but then there's always the possibility of evidence being discovered, so I wouldn't have done that. Mr. Dahmer had told the police some other points that I haven't yet mentioned that bear on his responsibility. One has to do with how he would select the victims whom he brought home. And he had told the police that before going out in the evening, he would generally know whether or not he planned to commit a homicide. That before going out, he'd prepare the medication by powdering it and leaving it in a glass on the countertop in the kitchen. He described the kind of body build that he was looking for, and said that he generally looked for individuals that were alone or not with a tight-knit group, that he'd generally wait until the closing of the tavern, and when the patrons were filing out, he'd approach the victims and ask them if they wanted to accompany him home for the usual reasons of pictures or sex or to drink, and that he also looked for men without a car. And so Mr. Dahmer had a particular kind of male in both body build and in situation that he sought. Mr. Dahmer also told the police, as he told me, that he received physical pleasure from being with the victims while they were alive and would have preferred that the victims remain alive, that it was better to have them with him dead than to have them leave, and that he would generally decide to kill them when they indicated that they were about to leave. Finally, I asked Mr. Dahmer whether he missed drinking since he'd been locked up. And he said that he had not in the past been drinking every day, only when he committed the offenses. I'm sorry, this was not my question, this was from the police. He told the police this, that he stated that when he killed the individuals, he was always drunk, and the drinking helped him get into the frame of mind and made it easier for him. He didn't drink every day, but when he planned to get someone, he would start drinking after he planned, and then he was usually drunk when he killed them. He related that he even drank when he was cutting up the bodies.
Gotta be aware of Jeffrey Dahmer. He starts putting in a bender early about noon, right? It's like, how many has he had?
And stated that it helped him, helped to make it easier when he was doing this. And that is consistent with what he told me with respect to his drinking at the time of the offenses, though he had indicated to me that he was drinking every weekend and not only at the time of the offenses. That, I think, exhausts that list.
Did you also have occasion to read what lay witnesses said about the behavior of Mr. Dahmer, and what consideration did you give that?
Yes, I read the accounts given to the police from a large number of persons who knew Mr. Dahmer over the years and who had observations about his behavior. They included his relatives, his parents, his mother, his brother, his grandmother, his stepmother, accounts from a large number of people who knew him during his high school years, including the few people who were friends, accounts of the neighbors around his grandmother's house who had seen him there, accounts from people who knew him in the gay community, and people he'd run into at various clubs, the manager of the apartment building, and a large number of the neighbors in the apartment building, and of course all of those accounts of the persons who were present during the incident when Konerak Sinthasomphone was outside the apartment. And finally, accounts from a large number of co-workers and people who knew Mr. Dahmer from the chocolate factory.
And you evaluated and weighed those in the formation of your opinion?
Yes, I did.
You touched briefly in the, subsequent to the West Dallas Library incident, you touched briefly onto a potential interest in the occult that Mr. Dahmer considered at that time. That would be in 85 or 86. Did you have further reflections on that, and what caused or occasioned those reflections?
Well, on this theme of the occult in various ways, there are a number of chapters, I think. One is in high school, where Mr. Dahmer and the person he befriended his senior year, Jeff Six, would have some discussions about the occult. But according to both Mr. Dahmer and Jeff Six, Mr. Dahmer wasn't all that interested in it. There was another person they knew who seemed to be quite taken by all that, but it wasn't Jeffrey Dahmer, who was very interested. Though they did play with this, and there was an occasion when Mr. Dahmer and friends pretended to have a seance, or thought they were having a seance, during junior or senior year of high school, and they sat about in a darkened room and tried to contact spirits. Some of the boys carried on, and the girls got scared and ran across the street. And there may have been more than one seance, because the recollections differ on exactly which youths were there at the time. At one of them, one of the boys bought some magic powder and threw it on a candle. And there was one occasion when Mr. Dahmer was interrupted by his father, and father was not encouraging of all this. But that, I think, is the actual tone of the activities related to the occult while he was still living at home with his parents, and that there was nothing more to it than
a little bit of an occult talk here. It's been an occult week here on Publicly Buzzed.
Kind of ordinary juvenile curiosity.
Oh, it's been an occult week in true crime.
And playfulness. There did later come a time, however, in young adulthood, while living with his grandmother, that I alluded to earlier, when Mr. Dahmer developed some curiosity as to whether there could be a dark side of spiritual belief that could be useful to him. This is after the period when he found that religion wasn't satisfying his desires. And here he told police that he felt religion wasn't working and maybe he should delve into the occult and Satanism, that after reading several books and dabbling in it, he realized this was not for him, and then he again gave in to his homosexual tendencies, was the language that the officers used. He began by going to the bookstores where he obtained information regarding gay areas in Milwaukee, and he began reading gay and homosexual pornography and became acquainted with the bars in town and became a patron of the baths. Now, when I talked to Mr. Dahmer about reading any satanic materials, he told me that he had read a particular book, or at least parts of it, called the Satanic Bible, which is a commercially produced book that he'd bought at an ordinary bookstore. And that book had two different components to it. One was that it seemed to be saying that one should feel free to do any selfish thing one pleases, and he found that appealing because it was consistent with his own view of the world. But he said there was a lot of mystical material in the book too, and various kinds of other things that were more supernatural ideas, and he didn't relate to any of that and rejected it. And so that was not of any further significance to him. There then later came a time when this interest resurfaced again, and this later time was after the murder of Anthony Sears. So this is after 3 of the charged killings and a total of 5 killings. For the first time, it occurred to Mr. Dahmer about some idea of starting a temple. And in his words, he had found Mr. Sears exceptionally attractive. Sorry, I should quote him when I say his words. I quote, "I found him very exceptionally attractive, and the desire to retain something from him was stronger than the fear of being caught, I guess. That was about the time I had the table, the black table and the 2 griffins, and that's when I started formulating the idea of the temple area off of this. It's the time I started watching Return of the Jedi." So the first idea of the temple area occurs only after 3 of the charged killings. And because this seemed curious, I explored what he had in mind about the temple and what the significance of this movie was to him in great depth. And in fact, he and I sat together and watched all of the scenes in the film Return of the Jedi that he considered significant. Likewise, there came a time later when he put that film aside and began making use of Exorcist 3.
Exorcist 3.
And particular scenes from that in a similar manner. And he and I sat together and watched those scenes from Exorcist 3 so that I could explore what the significance was to him of the images in those materials. And I think that what emerges from all of that is an understanding.
That's nightmare fuel right there. Watching the Exorcist 3 scenes that triggered Jeffrey Dahmer with Jeffrey Dahmer.
That Mr. Dahmer regarded one character in each of those films, a character known as the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, and the character who's obviously supposed to be Satan in Exorcist 3, a man who's confined in a cell-like area at that time. And what these characters have in common is that they are evil and corrupt and powerful, and both have the ability to use special powers to control others. In the case of the Emperor, he seems to be zapping people with energy beams of some kind and able to manipulate them in that way because it's futuristic. In the Exorcist 3, the power comes from being able to create illusions to make people think that there are snakes crawling over them, to suspend people on the ceiling, to be able to do all manner of things. Each of the characters in the scenes that he repeatedly viewed actually torments someone else in a way that might be described as torture, but Mr. Dahmer said that was not what was appealing to him, though there were occasionally fantasies where that might be, that he never enacted that, and he's consistently told me that making others suffer was not his desire.
Quote of the day, I'm not T-Pain. It sounds like maybe that was his power he got from Satan. All he had to do was watch Exorcist 3, and then his Satan power got unleashed.
Sexually. But that he did identify with the power of these characters. The characters are unattractive ones in both those scenes, and not ones that one would expect most people to want to identify with. But he liked the idea of the power that they had. And it happens that both those characters are portrayed in the films with yellow eyes that give them an eerie look. And Mr. Dahmer even went to the extent of buying a pair of contact lenses with that yellow tint that he would wear when he would go to the clubs so that he could have more of that look. His dabbling with these films and using them wasn't just ordinary curiosity. It's something a little more than that, in that he wanted to be more like those people. And he describes some sense of using the films to get himself in the proper mood to go out and cruise for a victim, and sometimes he would bring the victim home and watch a portion of a film with them and direct their attention to those scenes too. And so it did play some part in setting the right mood for him for committing these crimes. And he explained that he identified with the characters because he felt that he was thoroughly evil and corrupt, just as those two characters were, though he didn't feel he was as powerful as they. Nor did he ever give any indication to me or in any of the materials I've read that he ever believed he would acquire any magical powers from them, or that he would be able to be...
Like the opening scene in the Netflix series, literally episode 1, it's heavy. It's fucking heavy, exactly for the reason I put up on the screen there from MJ Monroe. Put that back up there again. I want to read it. Can you imagine being forced sitting up at the edge of his bed, knowing he's crazy, watching these films with him? You know, putting on Exorcist 3, and then you already realize, whoa, something's up here.
Be like those people, or be able to create illusions, or use zapping energy rays. None of those things were beliefs about himself. But because this was so odd, it needed to be explored to see whether there was a psychiatric symptom here that needed to be accounted for. And that's particularly true with respect to...
Damn, yeah, the public. Have you seen Faces of Death? Of course, you weirdo at 57%, and Yuck, you weirdo at 43%. Interesting. That's 40 votes. That got more votes than the other one. Interesting. And it's down the middle, basically. Keanu was the most overwhelmingly positive poll that I've ever had. Let that be known right now. Okay.
This issue that eventually emerges of the temple. Mr. Dahmer drew for me a diagram of what he had in mind for the temple. It's really exactly like the one that he drew for Dr. Becker. And that diagram of the temple shows 10 skulls on a table with incense burning on both ends, and 2 whole skeletons on either end of the black table, with the plaster griffins above the table, and a special globe lamp to impart an eerie sense of lighting. And he wanted a black leather chair so that he could sit in the leather chair and admire his collection. Now, the specific details of what he thought could happen there or wanted there come down to his wanting to have these objects, his believing that if he had them, it would provide him some kind of satisfaction, and his suspicion, and I think belief would be too strong, that maybe if he did this and had it set up this way, he would be able to somehow get in touch with some spiritual force or power. But he never indicated to me or to anyone else, as far as I can tell, that he believed he would obtain special powers from this, or that he thought it was going to give him magical abilities. It was more a matter of a suspicion or hope. It's something much vaguer than a belief. And his actions confirm that he was not acting under the belief that he was creating a temple that would give him special powers. In particular, I think that's clear when one notes that On June 30 of 1991, Mr. Dahmer made a false police report to the Chicago police about a stolen wallet, which was part of his effort to be excused for yet another absence from the chocolate factory, where his job was in jeopardy, so that he could stay in Chicago and continue to go to the gay strip clubs and the baths, and which was on the same trip from which he brought Mr. Turner home. If he thought he was about to have a temple that would give him magical powers, I don't think he would have taken such steps to preserve his job at the chocolate factory. Likewise, on July 13 of 1991, Mr. Dahmer called the chocolate company on a Friday night and said he couldn't come in to work that night because he had to take his sick grandmother to the hospital. They told him he'd need proof, and he was unable to obtain proof. Here again, if he thought he was about to have special powers from a mystical temple, he would not have needed to lie to preserve his job at the chocolate factory. I believe.
Court's in recess. All right, please.
Wow. Okay. We are going to, part 6. We're going to open next week again with Dr. Park Dietz. Wow. Okay. As we continue here, next week is week 20 of Murder Church. Believe it or not, that's absolutely unbelievable. MJ coming through with the Murder Church and football. Hell yes. Praise. Here's hoping the Dolphins lose. Again, I don't watch football, so I'm going to be on your side, MJ. I hope that I can help you with a little bit of the, mojo coming through the computer screen at you. The epitome of evil. Everyone hanging out here today, thank you so much. Awesome morning. I'm glad that people like to start their morning with Murder Church on Sundays. Unbelievable. You guys rule. You're going to be teleported out of this into a Joe Jackalone stream. He is, he's going to be having an undercover vice cop in New York City on. So when you get there, hit the like, and that's going to be starting at 2 p.m. Eastern time, folks. So make sure you go in there and hang out. Please make sure you're following Publicly Buzzed on Twitter/X. If you're not, you're missing out. I get pretty wild on there from time to time. I have my days. Make sure you're also following Ricky. Let's see if it works. I don't know if Stream Elements is awake. It's been dozing off all morning long. Doesn't seem like it's working. Let's see if I can get him up here real quick. Want to make sure you're following Dan. He doesn't do a lot of tweeting, but when he does, it's usually pretty entertaining. And he usually only comes bringing the heat. Make sure you're ready for Jay tomorrow. He's going to be coming through with some bangers. I'm absolutely positive. This entire week's going to be good. Thursday night here on Publicly Buzzed, you're going to be seeing a John Wayne Gacy stream. Chris Dewitt, Bob Mata, Dan, myself, having a John Wayne Gacy exclusive conversation. Brandon Hall from Music City 911 will be joining me and Dan for Feral Friday this week, having a guest on. And then Tuesday is not going to be me live, but it's going to be a premiere here on the channel. So please, regular time, 10 p.m. Eastern time, a premiere here is going to be last week's live. It's going to be an edited version, but it's going to be, it's about the serial strangler. So you're going to want to check that out. Let me know what you think when you do check it out. Hopefully that's going to be the new deals here on Tuesday. Every 2 Tuesdays we're going live. And then the other Tuesday, the next one, we're going to be having the premiere of an edited version of that live. I know that's a lot of words that I'm bringing out here. Holy shit. I don't know what's happening. Stevie Errol popping through here. Hell, what is going on? I don't know what the hell's going on with Stream Elements, but it is killing me right now. It was also fucked up on Feral Friday as well. But also make sure you're following my boy Stevie coming through. Thanks, everybody. Seriously. Murder Church, everybody. Hope Ain't Fear. Orange. We're in Halloween season. Dude, Halloween season is my favorite. I think it's Dan's favorite also, if Ricky's still here. I got to get those banana chips as well from the Philippines. But, guys, this is my favorite time of the year. So make sure you're watching this channel because we got some cool stuff lined up. Okay, we want to be having some fun. Feral Friday was one of my favorite personal streams that we've done, and it was it was just fun. So make sure you're also checking that out. I'm going to give you guys some links as well real quick. Please check this out. This was a clip that I took from Feral Friday, and this is the moment, guys. This is the exact moment that I lost a brother live on the internet. And then also here is another link, this one right here, another video that I made. I'm still got to pull some more. This is the most clippable show I've ever done. We've ever done. I swear to God. This one is called Dan Almost Killed Me. This was when we were children. Dan almost shot me in the head. Okay. Shooting with my crazy uncle who died in prison. It was a wild ass show, guys. Thank you all so much for coming through. Doing it. Buzzed October. Going to be lit. Doing a damn thing. Thank you all so much. Love you guys. Jamie, thank you for coming through, Modern brother. Mandy coming through earlier. Jay hanging out. Again, you're going to be hanging out with Joe Jack alone in a very short amount of time. Less than an hour. 50 minutes, guys. All right, I'm getting the hell out of here. I want to keep rambling all day. I got to go do some Sunday stuff here in the house. Here in the, before work starts. Okay, I'm getting the hell out of here. I love you.